The tale kicked off with Letitia's rage exploding across the clearing. She stood over Haru, snapped at him whether he was messing with her, and demanded he explain what he was thinking after he'd so casually turned on a weak little creature. She hit him with the reminder that she'd figured a monster of that size would be easy, something even someone as clueless and unskilled as him could manage. Haru blushed and mumbled an apology, but she swatted it away on the spot, barking that empty words like that had no value at all. She made it crystal clear, if she hadn't stepped in, his head would have already been crushed by now. Meanwhile, two men and a girl circled the slain monster, jaw-dropped as they praised Letitia like she always was, because with one single strike she cut the creature cleanly in half. And when she stepped forward, it felt like she was on a whole different planet, pure hero energy. They explained it clear as day. The hero title gets handed out to just 7 people on the whole planet, and Letitia wasn't only the youngest in history, she was the strongest, too. She added that Letitia was stunning, so kind, so unforgettable, that she even worried about someone as unreliable as Haru. But her voice cracked when she noticed Letitia and Haru still hadn't come back, and when another man said she'd gone to check Haru's wounds, everyone started to worry that his condition might be worse than they first feared. Meanwhile, way deeper in the forest, Haru grappled with the fact that Letitia had tricked everyone slick, clean, and cruel. Not a single one of them would ever believe the truth about her. Behind all that heroic praise, there was something darker, and Letitia snapped him to hurry and apologize, warning that the others might come hunting for them any moment. Haru thought he was the only one who got treated like this. To her, he wasn't just a comrade, he was her childhood friend. It didn't start out this way at all, but ever since she got picked to be the hero, he was convinced she only used him as a punching bag for her frustrations. Then Letitia smirked right at him, laughed it off, and called him utterly useless, and wondered if his last purpose was nothing but to stand in front of her, act as her shield, and die protecting her. Her cruel words snapped Harry upright like a switch flipped in his chest. Then she barked at him to explain why he'd stood when she'd ordered him to kneel and slam his forehead to the ground before the others showed up. He locked eyes with her and flat out said he couldn't keep following her orders anymore. He just couldn't accept what it meant to stay obedient. Letitia yanked her sword up and menaced him with it. Demanding how he even dared to talk back, she snapped that if he didn't want to get thrown out of the party, he'd better obey, yet Haru completely ignored her and started walking away. For one breath, Letitia just froze, then she shouted his name and pure disbelief hit her like a punch. He only paused to remind her that she was the one who'd declared, "Get him out if he keeps refusing me," and he wouldn't let her forget it. Tension flared in her voice as she rushed to tell him he could at least turn in the quest completion to the guild, because somehow that had always been her job, but Hari shut it down and said it didn't concern him anymore. She screamed his name again and again, begging him to stop, but he kept pushing ahead, never once sparing a glance back. A crushing sadness settled over him as he finally faced the real reason he'd let himself fight that weak monster. He didn't want victory, he wanted proof of how she truly felt. The Letitia he used to know would have never claimed that being her shield and dying for her was all he had left because the girl he remembered was already gone. Later, when he stormed back to the guild, the receptionist snapped his name, Harrow the traitor, and demanded in a sharp voice why he ditched the hero's party after 5 grueling years. Harrow just smirked and said he had his reasons, then leaned in and told her to take care of his paperwork. And then blurted out, "Is this move too sudden?" as he rushed to see if any solo requests were even available. He figured getting kicked out of the party might have been the best thing that could have happened. Letitia had been mistreating him for so long that, honestly, it wouldn't have shocked him at all if her real personality finally crawled out. Still, after all that, he couldn't shake the question burning in his chest. Why he was worried about her now that freedom finally belonged to him. The receptionist's sharp tone melted as she apologized, saying there wasn't a single quest open for solo adventurers, and Harrow's body tensed the moment that uncertainty hit because he had no backup plan and worse, he was dead broke. Right then a girl stormed up and she introduced herself as Alice Sprite and asked to talk in private. And once he nodded, she leaned in and revealed she was a solo adventurer too. She couldn't snag any real quests because of it, so she leaned in and asked him straight up, would he team up with her and form a party? Harrow flashed a grateful smile, then admitted the truth, he was weak, and he refused to pretend he wouldn't end up dragging everyone down. Alice blinked, totally confused, and pointed out that he'd once been part of the hero's party. He admitted it, but his voice caught, because the truth was he wasn't a real hero at all, just the group's errand boy. She couldn't wrap her head around it. How could someone from the hero's crew dare call himself weak just to convince her? Haru quietly hands over his adventure card. He's a level 7 male wizard trader. Alice's breath caught the second she saw the number, then he demanded to know hers and she admitted she was level 22. The shame hit him hard when he realized Letitia was level 55. Way past both of them, he looked at Alice and told her straight up, "Go find a different partner because staying with this would only hurt her." But Alice just grinned, bright, fearless, telling him it would all be fine and pushing them to try that quest together anyway. Then Haru nodded, and the receptionist snapped that he had 0 funds left, until Alice practically jumped in and offered to pay his share. Their very first mission together threw them straight into 4 hound wolves, and the second that beast lunged, everything changed. Alice lunged forward on pure instinct. She bared her blade and sliced straight through the nearest wolf with razor-fast precision. Hera stayed right on her heels as another wolf barreled straight at him, and Alice kept shouting encouragement mid-fight, her voice rock-steady. A third wolf lunged in, and Alice answered with a razor-sharp blow. Her lightning-fast blade cut straight through the air with brutal precision. Side by side, they slammed the whole pack back into retreat. When that final wolf pounced, Alice sprang back in and drove a double slash through it, cutting the beast down in one brutal sweep. With the last creature crumpling at their feet, she finally let out a shaky breath, then slowly scanned the wreckage and counted 4 fallen bodies. The hound wolves were down. Their very first joint subjugation near the city was a success. And as the dust settled, Haru admitted from behind Alice that he couldn't shake the feeling he was still just getting in her way. Alice whipped around and beamed at him, her smile saying loud and clear, "You're incredible," and somehow it made him believe it. The whole fight felt effortless with him at her side, like the world was pulling the strings for them both. And she kept noting how wild it was that a wizard could swing a sword with that kind of control, stepping in at exactly the moment she needed him most. To her, he wasn't just helpful, he was a true support ace. Haru brushed it off like it was nothing special, but Alice kept pushing him, saying it was genuinely impressive and that he already looked like he'd fought for years. Those words yanked him straight into an old memory, Letitia snapping at him, yelling that he just couldn't stand in front of her, accusing him of trying to steal her glory, then demanding he stick to one thing: support her and nothing else. A pressure clamped down in his chest, and when Alice asked what was wrong, he murmured that it felt like his heart had suddenly snapped shut. She started to worry he was sick, but he waved it off like it was nothing and insisted it wasn't serious. Without a single warning, the king wolf exploded forward and lunged straight out at them. Alice shot in front of Haru and threw herself between him and danger, shielding him instantly. She snatched the bite for herself, pushing him to flee, while confusion and panic exploded through her like fire. Why in the world would a king wolf show up in a place like this? She had to yank Haru and bolt, because she knew that wolf was about to catch them. If it truly came down to the last second, she'd throw herself into the fight solo. She promised Haru she'd hold them back and begged him to run. Terror filled her eyes. She nodded like she knew she might die right here, but since she was the one who dragged Haru into this quest, guilt hit her hard, so she had to guard him with everything she had. Haru snapped out of her panic, insisting it was nothing, just a hound wolf parent. Alice locked eyes with him, jaw dropped, and blurted out, "Wait, have you ever actually seen one of those before?" Haru admitted that the first time he saw one he'd been just as rattled, and he still felt that panic even now. Alice snapped that he couldn't slip away, and that this wasn't something a level 7 adventurer could possibly survive. But before she could even blink, Haru blasted the wolf apart with a flash of fire magic, effortless, brutal, and fast. As the scorched body slammed into the dirt, he stayed stone calm and declared that the subjugation was finally done. Alice's voice snapped sharp as she demanded to know what kind of magic he'd just unleashed. Haru, shaking with nerves, insisted it was only basic fire magic, then screamed even louder, demanding how he could call that normal when no ordinary flame could turn a king wolf to charcoal. Haru froze, then blurted again that he'd already told her it was just a level 5 hound wolf. Alice snapped back, insisting it wasn't the same species at all, it was the fully evolved form, a level 30 king wolf. She admitted that even she couldn't stand against it, and it wouldn't have shocked her if both of them were dead. Haru blinked, completely baffled, and shot back, "Who in the world told you that wild lie that this thing is the parent of a king wolf?" He kept insisting again and again that the only reason it was a bigger houndwolf was because it was its parent, and that, no matter what, it was still just a level 5 creature. Then another memory slammed into him, Letitia cackling when he finally learned beginner fire magic, laughing that even kids could do it, calling his excitement embarrassing and warning him to never, ever mention it to anyone again. Haru sank into his thoughts again, realizing that Letitia truly was the celebrated hero everyone adored, an adventure so legendary it deserved nothing but praise, and that realization hit him hard because of it. He swallowed every brutal word she threw his way, convinced she had to be right just because she was the hero, even when she crushed him with cruelty. Alice yanked him back by the sound of her name, then he finally saw it, she was hurt. He shot a healing spell at her the instant the magic hit, and her condition started to turn. Alice locked eyes with him, totally lost, and Herod immediately blurted out if she was okay, or if her wound was still screaming. She didn't even answer, she snapped with pure disbelief, demanding how a wizard could possibly cast healing magic. Healing spells were reserved for the priest class alone. Haru suddenly felt dread crawl in and told everyone that heal was just using beginner magic. Then Alice went even weirder, saying his whole understanding of basic adventurer knowledge was totally twisted. She snapped that his adventure card was obviously messed up and demanded he show it to her one more time. She stared at the card again and snapped, "When did you last update this thing?" Harrow finally admitted it was 5 years old the moment it was first issued. Alice snapped in frustration, scolded him for never renewing it, and ordered him to get back to the guild right now. When they finally hit the guild doors, Alice handed in his adventure card for a fresh renewal. The receptionist slid the renewal fee onto the desk, like it was the final countdown. Haru apologized, admitting the price was way beyond him, but Alice snapped back that she wouldn't get a wink of sleep until she figured out how he crushed a king wolf and pulled off healing magic. And besides, they'd already snagged the quest reward, so Haru tried to wave it off, insisting the money should be hers alone, but Hallie's cut her off and said it was for her own good too. She admitted he was ridiculously stubborn to the point of being impossible, and hit him with the truth he saved her life, then begged, "Let me do this much to repay you." Or rather, she straight up admitted it wasn't even close to enough and said from that moment on she'd throw herself at him even harder. The word devote hit Haru like a jolt and she instantly went all flustered. And Alice clocked it at once. She gently snapped at him, wondering if he just cooked up a strange thought from her words. Then she let out a gentle laugh, teasing him for being way too serious, and the two of them just shared that tiny breath of peace. Haru caught himself realizing that being near Alice lit up a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He couldn't even remember the last time the world ever went this still, this calm, this peaceful. He tore himself out of his spiraling thoughts and asked if that high renewal theme really meant the process mattered. Alice nodded hard, telling him an adventurer's card is your lifeline ID, and without a correct record of your own strength, you'll stumble into disaster the moment you accept quests. She couldn't wrap her head around it. How on earth did he manage 5 whole years without finishing something that mattered? Her words slammed another memory into him. Letitia had told him that talentless people stay talentless, and renewing his card would be nothing but a money pit. Then she'd laughed at him for not knowing his place, for daring to keep hanging around beside her for this long. Haru answered Alice in a low voice, thinking it didn't matter since he only did chores, but Alice snapped back. Adventurers had to renew their cards at least once every 6 months. But just when it felt over, another terrifying thought came roaring back. Letitia had always blocked him. She wouldn't even let him do that one basic, standard task. Just then, the receptionist came back with Haru's fresh card, muttering like she couldn't believe what Letitia was up to. Then Haru and Alice stared at the card. It flashed his true power, Sage level 82. The receptionist gaped in stunned silence, trying to make sense of it all. Harrow, the supposed traitor, was standing there with power that felt way too overwhelming to be real. Alice's eyes went wide as the truth hit, and she couldn't stop thinking, could Harv be stronger than the hero herself? Since Sage was a once-in-a-lifetime class that only a tiny handful of people could ever truly earn. Blinded by the shock, he couldn't even get a word out, no clue how he'd ever become a sage, no idea how he'd climbed this far in power. And the worst part? He couldn't tell if he'd finally surpassed Letitia or if she'd been seeing his true strength from the very start. The receptionist just froze, staring in disbelief. because there was no way Trader Sam could be a level 82 sage. Alice couldn't wrap her head around it either, but one truth slammed itself into her mind. And yeah, sages were basically magic legends. They blasted with offensive spells, powered allies with support magic, and even stitched people back together with healing, which is exactly why Haru could heal too. Even knowing exactly what he could do, she still couldn't wrap her head around how huge the fire he'd unleashed really was. Right then, Haru sank deeper into his thoughts, and frustration and confusion churned inside him. Then he couldn't shake the question, why did Letitia lie to him? No way she didn't know she was the hero, a legend walking among mortals. He realized her actions weren't born from stress or some twisted sense of care. This was something else entirely. But it all boiled down to pure resentment toward the one person who eclipsed her, before those spiraling thoughts could take over. Alice yanked him back with a sharp call of his name, then teased, "I'm hungry," and right after the renewal clicked into place, she urged them to sit down and eat together and with bright cheer she said she wanted to splurge a bit, because their first party quest deserved to be celebrated. Even then, Haru got stuck in his own head, torn up over whether he should finally tell Letitia the truth. Before he could squeeze a single explanation out of her, Alice leaned in and quietly told him he didn't have to say a word. She told him that spilling the truth could lighten the load, but sometimes every word you say just digs the knife in deeper. She confessed she couldn't stop wondering what his past with the hero was like, but she flat out promised she'd never want to be the reason those painful memories came crawling back. Haru leaned in and asked if she was really okay with it, and she reassured him with a soft, teasing tone that basically said, "Don't look so lost, you worrywart." Those words yanked him straight into the past, and suddenly he was back in his childhood, remembering the day he demanded to search for a lost kitten's parents. Letitia had feared he'd vanish too, but even then, she forgave him, and swore he'd protect him forever. But that memory slammed into another, one where she swore that being her shield and dying for her was the only worth he had left. This time rage surged up inside him, hot and unstoppable. For years, he clung to the gut-deep belief that Letitia would come back, because she was his precious childhood friend, no matter how her scorn cut him up, how her harsh words slammed him down, and how she kept brushing him off. He told himself that somewhere in her heart that care was still there. Only now did it hit him, he'd been the lone believer the whole time. Once they finished eating and stepped outside the restaurant, Alice beamed and said the food was amazing while Haru nodded, then apologized for crying in a place like this. She stayed calm and gently told him not to worry at all. Right then, Haru blurted that he wanted to travel with her from here on out, and Alice warmed up instantly. She told him she wanted to repay him for saving her life. She called it intuition, but deep down she felt that as long as she stayed glued to his side, everything would work out surely. Without warning, Letitia burst into view and locked eyes on Haru on the spot. She started right in, talking down to him and snapping that he was nothing but trouble. Then she sneered that his empty head should have finally cooled off by now and ordered him to come with her. Haru froze on the spot, then tried to dodge out of instinct, only for Letitia to snap back at her. She snapped her voice loud, demanded to know what kind of attitude he thought he was showing. Then Haru stayed cool and reminded her he was sure he'd already been kicked out of the party. Letitia snapped back, shouting that there was absolutely no way he'd survive if he left her party, and she ordered him to shut up, stop whining, and come back right now. Then irritation flared in her chest as she snapped, demanding to know if he really thought it was okay to defy his master, and calling him exactly what he was, a useless, talentless fool. Haru tried turning her own words back on her, asking if it was really okay for her to talk like that, but Letitia snapped that she didn't care what he thought. Then Haru pushed even harder. He pressed her, demanding to know if she seriously didn't care about shouting those humiliating insults in the middle of a packed crowd. At that moment, the crowd erupted into murmurs. People kept asking if they'd seen Letitia somewhere before, and then recognition hit like a wave. Whispers exploded that she was the hero, and everyone swore they'd heard she was gentle, like there was absolutely no way someone with that reputation could have spoken so viciously. As eyes kept swiveling onto her, Letitia blurted out, then quickly slipped back into the shadows, overwhelmed by the spotlight. "Haru, come to the southern gate later, listen up." Haru watched her storm off, and it finally hit her. Alice hadn't even crossed her radar. Alice leaned in and asked softly if that woman really was the Sword Princess. the hero he'd been telling her about the whole time. Haru nodded and confirmed it. She was Letitia Planetis, the sword princess herself. Then he laid it out. Her sword skills were so razor flawless they could hook you even mid-battle, and she didn't just fight, she crushed a sealed demon and came out with the title of hero. Every one of those wins was real, but the side they just stumbled into was even more terrifying. Alice's smile snapped shut as she watched her own face darken with those memories. Then he snapped that it was time to hunt for an inn, because the night had already crept way too far. After they checked in, they traded soft good-night whispers and then hurried off to their rooms. Right before Haru could slip away, Alice snapped out his name, then confessed that maybe it wasn't even his place for her to say it. But it hit him like a warning. He wasn't owned by anyone, and he'd better never forget it. Haru heard those words, and a gentle warmth spread through her. She thanked her from the heart. That night they all fled back to their rooms, and later on, Alice suddenly felt horror oozing out of the inn. He marched straight for the southern gate, right on cue, just like Letitia ordered. As soon as he showed up, Letitia tore into him, snapping that he was late, grilling him over what he thought he was doing, and furious that he made her sit there waiting. She snapped at him for biting the hand that fed him, then drilled into him. Did he really think someone like him, someone she'd always seen as just a servant, could act like that? Right then, Haru finally broke the silence, confessing that she'd always been his precious childhood friend. And that's why, even when she tore into him and mistreated him again and again, he still swallowed every bruise and kept enduring it. Then, with chilling calm, he snapped, "When exactly did I agree to be your servant? And why it all ended up like this?" Because when he spoke, Letitia just froze, totally stunned, and demanded to know straight up if he truly thought they were equals. She went on, saying if he wanted to push back, then fine, let him try. Still, she slammed the words out like a verdict. He was hers and only hers. She swore he'd never get out, because in her mind, only she could save him. Because she wanted to trap him under her thumb and never let him slip away. Hearing that, Harry instantly remembered Alice's soft little reminder. He swore he'd never belong to anyone, and with that promise burning in his heart, he told Letitia. Without a single pause, they admitted it. This was goodbye. Letitia's world tilted the second he spoke. Her face cracked into something unstable. With fury spiking through her, she yanked her sword free and snapped that if he wanted to test her, he'd better expect to lose at least an arm or a leg. Harv didn't flinch. He just told her to swing if she really thought she could win. The second the challenge slipped off his lips, she shot into motion. Her speed was straight up unreal. Then she tore into the fight with triple splash, top-tier sword magic, and Haru clocked it instantly. Harry snapped up a shield spell just in time, slamming the attack dead on, and the impact blast hurled Letitia flying backward. Frustration burned across her face as she snapped that his magic was outrageous. He turned away a top-tier sword technique with nothing but basic defensive magic. Haruthan told her, "If I ever lose you, I'm sorry ahead of time," and the words hit like a warning. Letitia snapped back that his fire couldn't touch her, not even once. And she warned him not to get cocky just because he'd crushed a level 30 King Wolf, because if she reminded him, it meant she was a level 55 hero. Harv shot back that he'd go all in and unleash his full strength too. A storm of energy swirled into his hand, and he admitted this was the first time he ever let it fly. But if she was going all in, he figured he could match her pace too, until she lunged to stop him. Her eyes snapped wide as the truth hit. He'd been holding back the whole time. Haru snapped the spell, and a brutal blast tore through the air, swallowing Letitia whole. Letitia couldn't stomach the fact that a so-called failure, the one she swore would never beat her, had finally crushed her. Even as the truth hit her like a wave, she kept growling under her breath that Haru was hers. Haru approached her, sadness heavy in every step, and whispered that the result was set in stone. He'd beaten her. He snapped that all those years together, their childhood bond and the 5 years they'd spent traveling, no longer meant a thing. With that, he thanked her for everything he'd shared with her up to that moment, then said goodbye for real and turned his back. Even as he walked off, Letitia kept screeching his name, refusing to let him go and begging him, over and over, not to leave her. She screamed, "Without me guarding you, you'll die." She never once glanced over her shoulder, and he brushed her off completely, then stormed right back to the inn. By the very next morning, he was still trading bites and secrets with Alice over breakfast. Haru swallowed his pride and apologized for yesterday's messy, unclear answer, then leaned in and told her, If you still want to, I'd like to officially form a party with you. Alice's face lit up instantly and she accepted it like it was obvious, no hesitation at all. Then she pushed, "As soon as we're done eating, we go straight to the guild and register our new party." Then, barely above a whisper, she confessed she was just relieved, because she'd been terrified he'd say no. When Haru pressed her on why she thought he'd reject her, Alice snapped it away fast, calling it nothing but a misunderstanding. She pivoted the conversation, insisting they had to map out their next steps first. Then she leaned in and asked him what he wanted to do. After a quick pause, she blurted, "Can I be the one to decide?" Haru nodded, and in that instant the memory hit him hard. Letitia had once snapped that he had no right to pick their destination, that someone talentless like him shouldn't even think, just fall in line behind her. With that memory still haunting him, he leaned toward Alice and confessed he wanted to chase the horizon, go somewhere far away. Later, Letitia stormed into the guild reception and demanded to know where Haru was, and the receptionist calmly told her he'd left on a journey. Until Letitia pushed for the exact destination, when the receptionist apologized and said that since Trader San was no longer in the hero's party, all of his details were now private. Letitia suddenly snapped back to the moment she spotted Alice looming behind. Haru had barely made it to the day when Shia tried to yank him back. Realizing he'd truly vanished with someone else, irritation exploded through him. And she blurted that he'd always been trouble, so now she was sprinting after him like this. Then the receptionist, eyes darting around nervously, whispered that a wagon headed straight for Orlando would roll out from the west gate. She froze for a breath, whispering, "Was I even allowed to say that?" Because revealing someone else's adventure trail was against the law. The receptionist spoke in a steady voice and swore she'd only pointed out where the departing carriage was, nothing more. She leaned in and said she was the one who handed out the adventure cards to Haru and Letitia in the very beginning. With a gentle flashback, she reminded Letitia of when she was still a trainee, back before Haru and Letitia even knew what they were doing, and how they'd once dreamed about turning that guild into their home base. She kept saying in a low voice, "I'm just a guild employee," like that was the only truth she'd ever defend, who grabbed every wild adventure and did exactly what they set out to do. Then, in a soft voice, she quietly asked if the two of them had ever really gotten along at all. Letitia admitted she didn't know exactly what went sideways, but she was sure it would all work out once she could talk to Haru later. She shot the receptionist a grateful smile, then turned and walked out without hesitation. She strode off with rock-solid confidence that didn't even flicker. She was utterly convinced everyone had her back, just because she wore the hero label. In Haru's head, it was all her fault, and she vowed, no matter what, that he would not slip away from her. Haru and Alice kept bouncing along in the wagon, chasing their destination as a gentle breeze and warm sunlight washed over them. Haru leaned in and asked Alice what Orlando was like, and Alice admitted she'd never even visited it herself. But she explained it was a legendary citadel home to the Lord's daughter, and everyone there believed she was being groomed as a saintess. Then Haru cut in and asked, "So what is a saintess exactly?" "Alice told me this class isn't handed out to just anyone. It only opens for people who get a divine oracle, and the rumor says saintesses can wield every kind of magic there is. And once they fully mastered their abilities, they could even raise the dead." Haru just couldn't believe the sheer size of the power she was laying out. And when he finally spun back to look at her again, everything changed. Alice's grin practically lit up her face as she bragged, loud and proud, that she'd totally nailed his new hairstyle, and it fit him way better than anything before. She said the new haircut looked way better than his old one, then pressed him, had his previous look ever really bothered him at all? Haru answered, but his voice carried a quiet sadness. Saying he was ugly and asking if she found him unpleasant to look at, he got an instant stop. Alice snapped back right away, making it crystal clear she wasn't judging his looks or his skills at all. Then she pulled out her mirror, staring back at him like a dare, and asked, "Have you ever really seen yourself?" And who was the first to shove that lie, telling him he was ugly, in his face? Harwood confessed it was Letitia, plain and simple. She told him straight up he looked awful, said she'd hit the absolute limit of what she could stand, and demanded he grow out his hair to cover that hideous face. Alice's face snapped into a stiff, tense look the moment he spoke, and she demanded to know why he swallowed Letitia's words without a single question. So Haru snapped back that Letitia was one of the most insanely skilled adventurers around, and even though she'd started getting a little twisted lately, she'd always been right about everything since they were kids. And he just knew if he hadn't been her childhood friend, there's no way he'd ever be let into her party. But Alice, fuming, snapped that he needed to trust himself because he was strong. Haru shot back that she only believed it because he just happened to be a level 82 sage. But even then, she couldn't make sense of why he had that kind of power at all. She leaned in close and reminded him, softly but surely, that it was him who ripped her out of the King Wolf's clutches. He could have ditched her and bolted, but he didn't, because without a steel-strong heart, he never would have had the courage to stay. In her eyes, he was the definition of strong and cool, but Haru still wore that same shaky, low-confidence look, insisting he only won because he thought the beast was just some easy level 5 monster. Alice snapped from having to repeat herself, saying he was unbelievably stubborn for real. Just then, a weird sound ripped through the air nearby. Both of them blurted, "Is that a monster?" as they hurried toward where it came from. They spotted a bunch of folks already locked in a brutal fight with death ant monsters. Nine-sama stood at the front, staring down the threat head-on. Ange-sama's personal maid, and when danger closed in, Nine snapped and told her, "Aju-sama, step back," and blasted a flare straight at the monster before it could react. Everyone still froze in disbelief when even a mid-grade fire spell bounced off it with zero effect. Nine-sama grabs Aju-sama and begs her to run with the guards, swearing she'll bait the monster's focus long enough for them to escape. As the guards tried to march Ange-sama to safety, Sama fought back in sheer panic, refusing to even consider abandoning the Nine behind. Panic shot through her voice when she realized Nine-sama, level 33, was the only one strong enough to push back those death ants, while the death ants had reached level 45. In the next breath, Nyan ripped into action, blasting the death ants with her twin bolts attack. But every shot missed. Death ants snapped back instantly like they'd been waiting for it. He slammed her in one brutal clash, wiping her out and leaving her battered in an instant. She charged forward, saw Nine go down, and watched frantic figures surge toward her. So she dropped to her knees, grabbed one girl's attention and begged her to stay awake, but before her words could land, the death ants snapped around and thundered straight at her. Right then, Harry unleashed a scorching wave of fire magic, blasting straight into the oncoming monsters. Everyone nearby snapped still, but Haru couldn't shake that lingering doubt, and admitted he wasn't sure someone like him could really be useful. Then Nine hit him with a grin, reminding him he'd just roasted a whole swarm of death ants by himself, so yeah, he'd be a huge help. Later, Haru and Alice fell into step beside Nine and Amsama, replaying the moment they agreed to her request, and Alice gave him a steady smile, saying it was totally okay, because walking the rest alone would have been a hassle. Then Salma stepped in, apologized for the sudden request, and promised that once they got back to the Autumn household, he'd finally get their real gratitude. Haru tried to brush it off with a light laugh, insisting there was no need for all the extra thanks. Alice leaned in like she was trying not to be heard and hissed that refusing gratitude from nobility was straight-up bad etiquette, because if they turned it down, the other side would be humiliated and lose face. She gave him a quiet scold under her breath, warning him that talking that casually to a lord's daughter could blow up in their faces. And just as that tension hung there, Salma stepped in gently. She told him, "Just call me by my age, I'm in your debt because I owe everything to Haru and Alice." She fired off a sweet request, asking if she could call him Harusan instead. Haru grinned and shot back, "Just Haru is totally fine and I'll make sure you're in my care." When night finally dropped and they huddled around a crackling bonfire, Nine said, "By tomorrow, we'll hit the Crest Mountains, but the cart can't squeeze through that mountain path, so after this we're walking." Haru then leaned toward Alice and asked, low and careful, if she was really okay with going on foot, and she nodded right away. Then he turned to Ain-sama and praised her pilgrimage as truly admirable, calling her amazing, and Ain-sama's cheeks instantly burned as she fumbled her denial. She pushed her harder, saying she still had tons to learn if she wanted to become a real saintess, and then she dropped the truth: it was the people of Orlando who sent her down this path. Her father was slammed with duties, so he couldn't always be there, but in Orlando everyone treated her like gold, and she vowed to repay that kindness by becoming a saintess. Then she shot Haru a compliment, basically telling him, "Look at you, using explosion at your age, that's next level incredible." When Haru calmly corrected her, she said it was nothing but fire. Everyone's face went blank with pure disbelief, like they couldn't decide whether he was actually joking or dead serious. Hera spun around, totally baffled, and blurted, "Wait, what's wrong with your reactions?" Alice snapped a tiny flame into existence in her palm with magic, just a small, neat fire sphere, and she said this exact size was the proper standard for the spell. A simple fireball meant to be launched straight at a target. Watching the comparison click into place and hearing the explanation, Haru froze. Pure shock hit him like a truck. He demanded to know exactly what happened to the fire he'd used earlier, and Alice snapped, losing it, blasting back, yelling what in the world that massive fire explosion was if it was really just fire. Nine nodded, calmer now, and said Haru-sama was packed with surprises. How anyone could tear things apart with just a basic fire spell was beyond words. Still stuck on the idea, Haru leaned in and asked Nine if she'd teach him to handle Flare Blast. He admitted that, as long as it didn't bother her, he only knew 3 beginner spells: Fire, Healing Magic, and the Defensive Shield. For a split second, everyone froze mid-breath, staring at him like they'd just seen the impossible. Then Alice snapped again, screaming in disbelief, and demanded how he could have spent 5 years out there and still only picked up 3 basic spells, with all those surefire chances to study even more. Haru rushed in, soothed Alice, and told her the truth, that he'd started studying magic all on his own. Letitia had snapped at him that he was wasting his time, laughing at the idea that some chore boy even wanted to learn spells. Then she ordered him to get back to splitting firewood. And because of that, he admitted he'd never once gotten past the beginner tier of magic. After hearing it, Nai just shook his head and said it sounded like a whole storm of complicated trouble was tangled up in it. And she got it totally. She told him she wasn't sure how much help she could really give, but if he didn't mind, she'd teach him the Flare Blast. Haru's face lit up the moment she heard it, and she practically gushed her gratitude, because Nine promised she'd happily take a job, especially from someone her lady owed. Seeing that kind of raw potential lit a fire under her even more, yet even with all that praise, Haru's confidence wobbled a little. After all, Nine was the head maid of the Auden household, and the sheer intensity of her excitement had Haru bracing himself for a teacher who might be strict to the bone. Number 9 kicked off the lesson by laying out the basics and building everything from the ground up. "Magic isn't just spells, it's a puzzle," she said. "The caster has to wrench the power into the perfect shape, and every element and combo matters. Magic volume, density, attributes, distance, and trajectory, all of it had to be lined up with deadly precision. If a single piece wouldn't lock into place, or if the caster dragged too long trying to assemble it, the magic would shatter mid-formation and the spell simply wouldn't activate." Then she lit up with the real Flare Blast and leaned in, telling him that so if he snapped the magic puzzle into place the right way, he could use it too. Nine then leaned in and asked if he'd finally seen the magic flow clearly, now that she'd slowed every step just to help him. Haru started to try firing a Flare Blast at himself, but Alice instantly shoved in and clapped a hand over his mouth, and made him swear that the very first time he unleashed Flare Blast, he'd slam on the brakes and hold back with every last ounce of power. Nine kept going, saying Flare Blast usually takes about a month to learn, and if you somehow mastered it on the spot, it'd be straight up miraculous. That's when Miraculous Alice leaned in and whispered that if it was Haru, he might actually pull off that miracle. Then she spoke up loud. No one was firing spells or the whole area would get obliterated. The very next day, they finally stumbled into their destination, and Haru's stomach dropped when he saw it. Right ahead was the entrance to a hero's grave, sealed by a stone door etched in a maze-like pattern. Ian and Alice finally exhaled, because the road stayed quiet and not a single monster dared to show up. Nine's mood snapped, her posture stiffened, suspicion flaring in her eyes. When Ange Salma whispered that something seemed off, Nine admitted it plain. The whole area felt way too silent, frozen like it shouldn't be. Haru leaned in and demanded, "So how are we supposed to open this sealed door?" And Sama went, "Only a saintess can trigger it." Then the second she made contact with the door, the seal snapped loose and the way in opened for them. She explained that once the time limit hit, the seal would kick back on by itself and the door would slam shut again, leaving anyone still inside trapped. So she told Haru and Alice to stay on guard. They leaned in close, trading a soft whisper as dread crept in, because a saintess's pilgrimage didn't feel sacred at all. Soon after, Angiama grabbed the lead and dragged them deeper inside. She came to a stop right before the coffin, told everyone to hold up, and swore she wouldn't be gone long. As she started her prayer, a gentle, glowing light surged around her. She pulled it in, then it sank deep into her body. Haru stared in disbelief, then it all finally clicked in his mind. To see why everyone swore a saint's power grows on a pilgrimage, this was the instant it all got swallowed up and absorbed. As soon as she was done, Sama shot an apology her way for making them wait. As she barreled down the stairs, her foot betrayed her. She slipped, crashed forward, and went tumbling. Haru lunged forward and caught her before she hit the ground, firing off worried questions. "Are you okay?" While Ange's voice came out faint, barely there. She admitted it felt like her consciousness was slipping away. Then, when she crumpled to the ground, Nine's face snapped tight with panic. Alice shot her a knowing look and said she'd suspected Nine was pushing herself away from the start. Then she guessed it was because Nine felt Angel's emotions and didn't want Haru drifting too far. Nine just laughed and admitted she was honestly blown away by how sharp Alice really was. Nine leaned in and spoke in a soft voice, saying her lady truly deserved to become a saintess, but she refused to let her sacrifice everything just to help others. She couldn't shake the fear that all becoming a saintess really meant was crushing your own heart before you ever got a divine role. Then she reminded them, and Sana was still just a girl. With the weight of it pressing down on everyone, Nine declared, "We've got to head back to Orlando," saying a messenger was already on its way from last night, and the house is probably whipping up a feast right now. But before anyone could even start talking, a dragon crashed into the scene out of nowhere. Meanwhile, Letitia barreled into the fortress city of Orlando, chasing Haru with pure fury, and every empty street and dead-end question only made her irritation spike higher and higher. She searched everywhere and still couldn't find him, so she snapped under her breath that Haru was probably dawdling somewhere up the path. Letitia's mind raced. Maybe she should backtrack and hunt the path she'd already cleared. Then the chatter around her suddenly snapped into a new set of words. Everyone was buzzing that a dragon had finally shown up on the Crest Mountains, the exact spot where the Ange Samus Saintess pilgrimage takes place. The people of Orlando snapped into action and agreed send the adventurers with advanced magic now. Then another voice cut in, "Dragons shrug off magic like it's nothing." And before anyone made a move, they decided Stama's family had to be told first. Between all the chatter, two men leaned in and whispered about a rumor like it might explode. A powerful male wizard with jaw-dropping firepower saved Sama, then stayed by her side and marched with her all the way to the Crest Mountains. The moment Letitia heard it, her calm snapped like glass. She burst into motion and shoved through the crowd until she reached the front. She shoved through them, staring ahead in shock, and they couldn't stop watching, because her sudden charge looked like a wild creature with its leash snapped. As she sprinted, frustration crashed through her thoughts, and she kept spitting out the same furious line, "He was a fool." She swore to herself this nightmare never would have started if he'd just listened to her as the hero. But then mid-stride suddenly realized it. Nobody could stand against her, and she would never let that happen. Her sprint faded into a crawl, then she froze, dead still, until the quiet hit, and she couldn't stop herself from wondering why she'd been so driven to. Letitia had always dreamed of becoming a hero, but now she was getting slammed by her own buried memories. Every time she tried to grab a clear memory, a brutal, blinding pain exploded through her head. All she could cling to were three crushing thoughts: protect Haru, keep him contained, and stop anyone from sniffing out his power. She kept repeating it to herself over and over until she decided she had to beat him. No matter what it took, she couldn't even guess how long she'd been stuck in that mindset anymore. Then it hit her like a thunderclap. Ever since the day she crushed the demon, nothing had been the same. As the wild thoughts in her head tangled into a full-on mess, she finally decided. If everything felt impossible to sort out, then the cleanest move was to lock it all away. She decided the only thing to do was lock her up, and she felt weirdly proud of the plan, calling herself a genius for hitting the solution, then sprinting straight back toward him. Meanwhile, Haru stood there shaking with raw terror, staring at the dragon for the first time, and blurted out if dragons were any different from normal monsters. Alice stayed calm and told him straight, dragons weren't monsters at all, they were their own kind of living being. Monsters got dragged into demons' shadows while dragons strutted like royalty, answering to nobody. The only thing they shared, the terrifying fact that both of them put humans in grave danger. She snapped, "Do it, run my plan." then revealed the mission, set off a flash bomb. And while the dragon was reeling in confusion, they'd slip away until 9 blew up the plan. She said she'd seen this exact kind in ancient texts, calling it a superior dragon, one of those insanely rare ancient ones still alive. Its magic resistance was so brutal that even a flash bomb wouldn't even blink. Just as they were about to move, the dragon roared out, confirming their suspicions, and then warned them not to try fighting at all. It warned that no human spell or weapon could touch its power, so all they could do was pick their fate, get ripped apart or get swallowed whole. Harris forced his legs forward even as terror screamed inside him, and he asked if the two of them could talk. Since that dragon was already speaking human words, it meant one thing: this had to turn into a real conversation. He swallowed his pride and apologized from the heart, admitting they'd barged into the dragon's territory without realizing it was his turf. They came to the hero's grave for business, wrapped it up fast, and bolted the moment it was done. And he couldn't stop wondering if the dragon would let them pass. The dragon erupted into booming laughter the second it heard his tone. It admitted straight up that no human had ever spoken to it before, like it was finally treating them as equals. Harrow blinked hard, trying to figure out which part of his words had thrown it off. The dragon's eyes narrowed as it stared down Haru, clocking his rogues and realizing he was a wizard, and then it smirked and offered a wager, leaving Haru to ask, "All right, what kind?" The dragon demanded he go all in, attack with every ounce of power you've got, and if Haru could make it twitch even the tiniest flinch, it might finally say yes to his wish. Haru agreed on the spot, and that dragon immediately laughed in his face, snickering that it was pointless and that it'd be pathetic watching him fight just to fail. Haru refused to back off. He clenched his resolve, unleashed his full power flare blast, and slammed it straight into the dragon. Angelina and Alice stood there, stunned and frozen, because Haru had already ripped off a flare blast without even blinking. Only Alice stayed steady. She'd seen it coming from the start, like she knew he'd pull it off the whole time. Nana and Alice both froze when they saw the dragon still standing strong, even after Horror's magic was used. Nana stared at the jaw-dropping magic resistance, seeing its scales scorched but somehow standing strong, and the dragon, shaken to its core, muttered, "I honestly thought I was finished." Wondering if Haru was even human, Haru snapped his gaze toward Alice. He finally realized she was right, and the moment he listened, everything clicked. The technique hit his hands like it was always meant for him. If he hadn't held back the way she told him, he'd probably have blown it and crashed straight into failure. He spun back to the dragon and told it he'd promised his comrade he'd hold himself back the first time he unleashed that thing. He demanded they ignore that dried-up last try and vowed the next attempt would fire off for real, full power, no excuses. Just as he was about to keep going, the dragon snapped its head down and slammed it to the ground. Haru went stone still, totally lost as he stared in shock. Then his mind screamed, why was it bowing? The dragon finally admitted it had let arrogance take over, so it started bragging about being a legendary dragon, roaming free, scaring humans just to amuse itself, until it realized there really was a Haru out there who could change the game. A terrifying kind of power that could make even death feel real. Then, head bowed low, it humbly begged Haru for forgiveness. And right then, Alice realized it. Haru wasn't just strong, he had the power to crush an ancient dragon. Haru stayed cool and said it didn't bother him much if the dragon had truly thought about what it did. Then the dragon gazed at him in awe and praised him as merciful for somehow wielding that kind of overwhelming power with zero pride, and still choosing to forgive the dragon that had just attacked him. He admitted with brutal honesty that his own arrogance had been disgraceful. Then it snapped into view and said, "I'm Sana," asking Haru his name, until Haru answered, "Haru traitor." Sana blurted out that he'd take her on as his student. Hera froze, stunned, and then she pushed back, insisting. He insisted that kind of thing was impossible. Then Santa snapped, asking if he was dodging the idea just because he didn't want a dragon, and the very next second the dragon vanished, then reappeared right in front of them. Suddenly, a girl in human form stepped into view right in front of them. Haru just froze, staring in disbelief because it could actually shift into that shape. Then she stayed calm and said it was nothing special, just one of a dragon's natural abilities. Then she announced in a shaky voice that she'd be under his care, calling him master as overwhelm crushed her completely. Haru spun toward Alice and demanded to know what on earth they were supposed to do. But Alice was just as clueless while the girl kept yelling, "Master," like it was all she could breathe. She clung to him with unwavering devotion, swearing she'd do anything if he'd just let her tag along, until Hari cut her off cold and said that was out of the question. As soon as the dragon blurted that if she couldn't be his student she'd have to become his slave, Haru didn't even get a second to react. Then Letitia showed up. When Haru asked why she was there, she snapped the question right back at him, demanded to know what he thought he was doing, turning a little girl into his own slave. Haru tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding, but Letitia snapped him shut with raging fury and swore there wasn't even one angle where any of this could be twisted wrong. Then she went for the jugular, mocking him to his face and even making fun of his hair. Haru demanded to know why she followed him and what the whole match earlier even meant. Then she snapped back that it didn't count, not in that moment. Sana burst in shouting, spilling the truth that the hero was hopelessly in love with Master. She said Letitia liked him so hard she ended up bullying him, and even if she called herself a hero, Santa reminded her that she was still just human. Then she snapped at Letitia that pushing her feelings onto someone else was a total no-go and that she needed to think about how much mess she was making. Horace just froze in shock because the very girl who'd begged to be his student was now standing there, lecturing Letitia. He remembered how heroes' stats get cranked way past normal numbers, so you can't judge their power just by level. His win over Letitia earlier probably happened only because she let her guard drop. Once she went serious, she could obliterate an entire mountain without breaking a sweat. And then Sana dropped her blunt truth, and that alone was more than enough to light the fuse. Haru knew he had to slam on the brakes and stop Letitia before she could react. But before he could even step in, Letitia snapped with rage, firing off questions about what Sana was saying and swearing, absolutely swearing, that none of it could be true. Sana doubled down, shouting that if you truly loved Master you'd get along, and then Haru fell dead silent. I catch myself wondering, did Letitia really have those feelings locked away in her heart? Then he jabbed a finger at the hero's grave entrance and told Letitia they had to grab something from inside for their request, so she better not get in the way. But the second Haru spoke, Letitia's whole vibe snapped. She burst into a sharp laugh and said, "If I just claim this place first you won't be able to finish your request at all." Then she vanished at full sprint, tore toward the hero's grave entrance and dived inside without a second word. Aang quickly spotted the gate's seal snapping shut, and he warned everyone just in time. Alice snapped her head toward Haru, asking if it was truly okay to just let her barge in like that, while Haru stayed cool and said, "Yeah, it's totally fine." Knowing Sana, she'd slip out eventually, even if it took a few days. But Haru left Sana genuinely blown away. Alice watched Santa like a hawk, calling him a cold-blooded master in her head, swearing she'd never mess up and anger him again. And even with all of that, she couldn't ignore the truth. Santa was going to stick with them from here on out. Later that night, everyone finally dropped into deep rest. Alice scanned the room, but he was nowhere in sight. Worried out of her mind, she sprinted off to find him, until she finally spotted him, alone and sitting in silence. She leaned in and reminded him, "If you ever slip off alone, tell me first. I'm your partner, so don't leave me in the dark and apologize." After that split-second pause, his head was a mess of thoughts, and he blurted out, "I've got to ask you something." And then he asked her if life taught her this hard truth. When someone poured out their love to her, she'd feel like she had to respond somehow. Hallie's face fell the moment she saw how wrecked he looked, and she told him straight up, she didn't buy that acceptance was the only answer. And the only thing that actually mattered was what he felt in his own heart. Harwood confessed that when he was with Letitia, it all felt effortless, like it was always meant to be. He'd never once pictured walking away until he finally understood who she truly was. Once he finally faced the truth and ripped off the illusion he'd clung to for years, he turned his back on her, only for everything to flip on its head when she suddenly swore she loved him. He had no clue what he even wanted anymore. Then Alice spoke softly, promising she'd always stand by his side. But this was the one thing she couldn't let him solve easily, because she had a secret motive of her own, and Haru pushed her to spill what it was. He added that every step of their journey down to its one true purpose was all he could think about. He couldn't help wondering if a goal like that was even reachable, and Alice shot back instantly that it definitely was. Because when you decide what kind of adventurer you want to be, there are no limits holding you back. Hera let out a soft sigh and told her, "No rush, I don't need an answer right now." When he softly asked why she'd chosen the life of an adventurer, Alice froze mid-breath, realizing nobody had ever once asked her about it. She shrugged and admitted there was no big, dramatic reason. She just had one person she was desperate to meet. The second Haru heard it, his whole body jolted with shock. He blurted that if her trip was truly pulled by the person she's been dying to find, then they couldn't waste a second letting him choose where they go next. He shoved urgency into every word, insisting they sprint to find that person. Then Alice steadied him and soothed his panic. She told him she'd already crossed paths with them, and that she'd finally pulled off the meeting with the exact person she was hunting. Just as she felt stuck and had no idea how to go on, she ran straight into him right then. When Haru opened his mouth to ask more, she pushed herself up and got ready to rejoin the others, then softly warned him not to catch a cold from the night breeze. Haru thanked her for looking out for him. As soon as she walked away, he sank into silence, replaying the nameless mystery in his head. Who was that person, the one she had been craving to meet so badly? While she headed back, Alice clamped down on her thoughts and refused to let a single one slip. She realized it was way too dangerous to say it out loud, that the man she'd been hunting for all this time was him. Then everything snapped back to the past, straight to the day Alice first laid eyes on Haru 10 years ago. Inside the wagon, young Alice stared out the window with wide, shining eyes, drinking in every second outside, while her mom kept an easy hand on her and checked she was okay. Her dad just smiled and reassured her she could look out as much as she wanted. Alice leaned in with bated breath, bursting with excitement she couldn't keep bottled up. When the family finally rolled into their destination, Alice climbed down from the wagon and whispered, almost in awe at how stunning the village looked, while her parents started unloading and getting settled. They told her she could go play for a bit, and Alice asked for permission the proper way. She beamed and nodded right away, cheerful as she promised her mom she wouldn't roam too far and would come back on time for her medicine. She strolled through the quiet village, gulping in that crisp, clean air, and soon, right under a tree she stopped, letting her heartbeat finally calm down. She finally snapped into the moment and realized she'd walked all this far with zero pain. As she sat there, she swore to herself that if it was this village, her illness would finally vanish. Then the bushes snapped with a sudden rustle. Alice let out a sharp shriek as a boy crashed out, equally stunned, blinking at her like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he blurts out who she is and wonders if she's the kid who just moved in, and Alice answers her name in a shy, shaky voice. The boy paused, flashed a warm smile, said his name, Haru, and thrust out his hand, and Alice stared at it for a beat before slipping her own into his. And that tiny gesture instantly etched itself into the memory of their very first meeting. Haru leaned in and asked gently if she'd come to the village for treatment. And when Alice nodded, she admitted the dusty air back in the city had only made her condition worse. So when Haru lit up and asked if she could play tag, Alice lowered her eyes and apologized in a small, quiet voice. He quickly pushed for the slower route and offered to walk her around the village himself. And he'd swear he couldn't wait to play with her the moment she finally got better. Alice nodded in a soft whisper and the two strolled shoulder to shoulder, fingers locked tight in their hands. Not long after, Alice was sprawled in bed, burning with a fever, while her mom stood in the doorway, begging Haru's pardon and thanking him for freaking out over her. Haru just stayed quiet, eyes lowered, worry written all over his face. Alice pulled the blanket tight around herself, staring at her frail body like it was warning her, because even getting up and walking once a week had pushed her to the edge. She couldn't stop worrying. Would her crush grow tired of her once she couldn't step outside anymore? She stared through the window. She wished so badly that she could run back into his arms and play again, praying he'd heal fast so she could. Haru kept showing up, staying by her side with that calm patience. Then Letitia finally arrived, and the instant she spotted Haru and Alice holding hands while they played, everything hit her at once. Alice's face twisted with pure irritation, and soon after she and Letitia slid into the same seat side by side. Letitia grumbled that adults always chewed her out for getting muddy, while Alice just sat there meekly listening. In a low whisper, Alice confessed she sometimes wished adults would say those same things to her, because she'd never once been able to join the games that left everyone muddy. Letitia froze in shock, and right away Alice scrambled to set it straight, insisting she never meant it the wrong way. Letitia finally cracked a smile and told him she was genuinely hoping he'd feel better, like, really soon. Alice snapped her gaze up, shocked. She even admitted she'd thought Letitia couldn't stand her. But Letitia shot that down fast, insisting she'd never felt that way. Right then, Haru burst in, rushed and out of breath, apologizing for the delay and asking if anything had gone wrong while he was gone. Letitia, instantly overwhelmed, snapped at him for ditching Alice alone, especially after knowing her body was so weak. Flustered, she spun away and snapped at them not to worry so much once she was gone. Haru and Alice stood side by side in quiet whispers, murmuring to each other that Letitia's kindness came wrapped in her own stubborn little way. Alice stared at Letitia's retreating back, aching for the day she could finally break free of all restraints and run, so she could play with her too. No one would have called it an exaggeration. Those days were bursting with pure happiness. That stretch of time was the happiest chapter of Alice's life, and she was glowing as she strode across the open fields with Haru, their hands linked tight. Her laughter chased after them, and it was like her sickness finally loosened its grip. She must have found peace at last. And that's why she'd been caught completely off guard. That day, a festival lit up the village, and Alice was over the moon because Haru invited her, until everything shattered in an instant. The attack hit harder than anything she'd ever survived with him, and dark, thick blood poured from her mouth as adults stormed in to grab her. Screaming for help and calling the doctor at full speed, they bought back her life in time. And still, everything fell apart that day. Haru tore himself apart with guilt, absolutely sure Alice's collapse happened because of him, and then he broke down in tears. Every single day he sobbed, couldn't even hold food down, and when he managed to swallow, he'd spit it back up again and again. Day by day, his body crumbled until his very life hung by a thread. By the time Alice finally found out what was going on with him, 2 long weeks had already crashed by. She burst into tears, asking her mother why she hadn't told her sooner, and then insisted she needed to apologize to him, just to make sure he knew this was never his fault. Her mom spoke softly and told her Haru was no longer in that fragile condition. Still, if he laid eyes on Alice right now, nobody could guess what kind of reaction would hit him. Alice froze when they told her she'd never get to see him again. Then she turned to her parents and demanded to know why they'd learned so many spells just for her. Could her mother cast that brutal spell, one that wipes out the memories of everyone who's survived unbearable suffering? With a shaky voice, she pleaded with her mother to wipe every trace of herself from her mind forever. Her mother wrapped her in comforting words, insisting it was just an accident and that no one was to blame. No Alice, no Haru, and pleaded with her not to drown in guilt. Alice sobbed, begging him not to let her be the reason he'd hurt, because he'd been her very first friend. Tears streamed down her face as she begged her parents to cast the. Then the spell tore through and wiped every last memory of her right out of Haru's heart, until somehow the magic finally worked and Haru bounced back, living like none of it ever happened. So the memories stayed buried for good, and right after that, Alice tore out of the village. Those memories were the only things she had left to hold onto. After years of battling that illness, she finally fought her way back and rose above it. She clung to life for one razor-sharp reason, and nothing else. One day I'll meet Haru again, right this time, and stay by his side to guard him with everything I've got. If she'd really felt how deep it went, wiping his memories clean and disappearing would have been downright selfish. She finally used magic to dye her hair and vanish into a new disguise, then became an adventurer. And when she came back to the village, Haru was already gone with Letitia. Since Letitia had climbed all the way to the rank of a hero, Alice could finally track their trail. When she later heard at the guild that Haru had bailated on Letitia's party, her world instantly rocked. This was the first time she'd seen him since childhood, and she could barely wrap her mind around it because the guy standing right in front of her didn't just look like Haru, it had to be him. She clocked his struggle and shot up a silent prayer, "Please, don't let him remember me," because she needed to move in on him without a hitch. Then we snap right back to the present. Haru's staring at Alice like she's the only thing in the room, and when she asks what's wrong, he answers in a hazy voice that sometimes, the moment he looks at her, a weird sense of déjà vu hits him. Alice swallowed her fear and stared into the void, realizing she'd been dangerously naive. Changing her hair was nothing, because if she'd altered her face, she'd commit a real crime, and even with a fake name, her true name still sat on her guild card. Then Haru kept going, saying that every time he was with Alice, he felt completely safe, because somehow she always managed to save him, over and over again. Alice slipped back into her thoughts and silently swore to herself that everything was true again. She vowed she'd keep protecting Haru, no matter how many years it took. because atoning for her past wasn't just a duty anymore, it was the only reason she could keep living. But through it all, Letitia stayed the problem. Harrow and Letitia used to click so well, yet Alice just couldn't make sense of why Letitia now treated him like this. In Alice's eyes, Letitia's fixation had turned weirdly obsessive, yet Haru brushed it off, insisting she was just a little distorted. But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the whole story. Something had to have happened to Letitia during all those years she was gone. And the moment they finally rolled into Orlando, Haru and Alice were buzzing with anticipation. Right in front of them, the city rose like a towering, fortified castle. This wasn't just a place, it was a real fortress city. Suddenly, an Auden House servant sprinted toward them, yelling, "Nine!" At the top of his lungs, Nine whipped around and demanded what happened, and when the man trembled and stammered, he begged her to rush through the back gate. He said a nasty rumor started spreading in Orlando, that Anjou-sama was summoning monsters, steering them like weapons, and unleashing them to attack innocent people. Nine erupted in outrage at the sheer audacity of that claim, demanding to know who had the nerve to spread something that indecent. But Ainge calmly stepped in and told her, "Hold on, listen first," before either of them made things worse. As they stormed up to the mansion, Cardo Autumn, the Lord of Orlando, stood there, ready to set everything in motion. He greeted them warmly and blurted out his thanks to Haru for saving his daughter. He admitted he'd planned a huge celebration for Hera, but the situation wrecked everything, and he hated that he couldn't make it happen. Then Alice snapped her eyes to her father, totally lost, and demanded, "So what's going on here? What's actually happening?" He admitted he didn't even fully get what was happening. Then he went on, people swore they'd actually seen her commanding monsters. Nine slammed into the scene and declared it impossible. No logic, none at all. Then Lord Cardell shot back that the Auden household was already digging into it. Nine went on, saying her lady had been away on pilgrimage for days and even death ants had clawed her personally, so he shot back that this was exactly the issue. The moment Ange slipped out on her pilgrimage, those accusing testimonies died off, and a lot of people swear the whole death ants attack was staged, because those creatures weren't even supposed to exist out there, meant to shove all the suspicion in a different direction. Then, another servant tore into the room like something was on fire. Nine snapped at her for barging in without knocking, and the servant stammered that it was urgent. He trailed in after her and blurted out a formal apology for the intrusion, making sure she heard it. Age of Tommen had just been stamped into existence, ordered by the Adventurers Guild to be kept under tight restraint. Even with her being the Lord's daughter, the man hit the table and demanded she obey whatever the guild decided. Nine immediately lunged into action, shouting that she was going to wipe out the suspicious intruder. No mercy. Still, he caught her knives between his fingers like it was nothing, stared her down with eerie calm, and even called her a terrifying maid. Then he leaned in and wondered if he should wait until someone else finished talking. Nine shot back coldly that she had zero reason to talk to someone who showed up just to hold her lady back, and then she braced herself for the next strike. But the man snapped back with a sudden punch, cutting through her words and forcing her to listen right then. His punch never landed. It slammed into a barrier Haru threw up just in time, halting Madara cold, and now the guy was seriously intrigued. He grilled the timing of the magic and couldn't stop wondering how Haru pulled off such razor-precise activation. He locked eyes with Haru and called him a young wizard boy, and realized that deploying defense magic with that kind of pinpoint accuracy and raw power wasn't normal, it was on another level entirely. Right as the conversation started to heat up, Sana blurted out with pride that even an ancient dragon recognized her master's power, and that Haru had reached level 83. Alice snapped in fast, shoving her mouth shut because exposing someone's real strength in public just isn't proper. Then the man leaned in and asked Haru, "Will you hear me out calmly?" And Haru nodded and agreed. He introduced himself as Jean Dainsleif, brushing it off like he was just some lowly, roaming nobody. He made it crystal clear he'd only been sent to watch the Saintess so they could confirm she wasn't mixed up in any wrongdoing. Even the guild didn't buy it, he said. After you'd lived in Orlando long enough to know who the Saintess really was, you couldn't believe she was out there commanding monsters for just anybody. The Lord of Orlando stepped up and laid it out. Orlando was ringed by brutal, unbreakable walls, so monsters rarely ever showed up. though being a massive trading hub meant newcomers flooded in every day. And there's a real chance those fresh arrivals never even notice how pure Angel truly is. He fired a question at Jean. After all those complaints, did the guild act because it had to keep the peace? Jean nodded and shot back a quick thanks for the straight-up summary. Ange asked if the man truly stood before the Lord of Orlando, and then she promised she'd follow the guild's orders, but Nine snapped in right away, saying Ange didn't owe obedience to someone this rude. Ange kept her calm and shot back that if they wanted to clear suspicions, turning it down would only make people look even worse. Jean exhaled in relief and said she finally understood, then insisted the guild had her back. Meanwhile, he made it clear he wasn't about to shadow her non-stop. He claimed, totally unfazed, that he wouldn't turn down permission to watch her bath if it helped prove her innocence. Angel Frozen shock. Before Nine could even blink, she snapped her blade to his throat and hissed that one more vulgar jab at her lady, and his head would literally be flying. With everyone teetering on the edge, the Lord of Orlando strode forward and decided it was time to finally put order to the chaos. Jean laid out just two possibilities. The witnesses were flat out lying, or some fake Ange had slipped in behind the scenes and caused those incidents. Because seriously, how could anyone impersonate her that easily when everyone knew exactly what she looked like and saw her everywhere? Alice didn't miss a thing. Such deception wasn't out of the question. Changing hair color with a spell was one thing, but magic strong enough to copy someone's full appearance was forbidden. Haru heard Alice's quiet murmur and shot back that magic like that really does exist. Then he admitted it was wild to see how much she actually knew. Alice blinked, thrown off, and insisted, "I'm not some expert, I just happen to know little bits across a bunch of subjects." Then she snapped her gaze to Ange, demanding to know the real reason behind the culprit's actions. Ange swallowed hard, apologized, and admitted she couldn't pin down any motive at all. Right as they were about to talk again, the door slammed open. One servant burst in like a firestorm. When the monsters suddenly hit Orlando, the Lord of Orlando rushed out to face them. Then Harris stepped up too, saying he'd come along and demanding that Agent 9 stay trapped indoors. Harrow hurled his fire magic at the creature and watched it get wiped out in a blink. Sana stared at the outcome, grinning because even one fire spell from her master packed terrifying power, just like she'd predicted. Then Haru asked if it looked weird to her too, and Sana shot back, "Why would any of this ever be normal?" She shot him a reminder. She'd survived countless explosion spells before, and not a single one had ever burned a scale of hers. Just nearby, two guards leaned in and whispered like they were sharing a secret they couldn't afford to say out loud. Ever since Anselma came back, those monsters have been rattled and restless, and everyone kept blurting out, "What if the rumor's actually true?" Until Haru spotted them and they instantly froze in place. And they rushed in, urgently claiming they had to get back out on patrol. Haru finally snapped that the rumor had raced way farther than anyone ever expected. And he started piecing together who was behind it and what they were trying to pull off. Later, once Haru, Alice, and Santa slipped back to the house, Nine leaned in and asked if all those people really bought those accusations. Haru said it looked like they weren't convinced, they were just quietly guilty for doubting Ange. Nine said that meant they couldn't turn in their report. Haru froze for a second, thrown off by how that one word left his head spinning. Ange told her, "I need the priestess at the Grand Temple to confirm my pilgrimage is complete, but I can't leave these grounds myself." Jean stayed cool as ice and told her, "If I go with you, nothing real will stop us from going outside." And when Ange pushed for confirmation, Jean leaned in and reminded her, "I told you already, the guild's got your back," and then promised he'd ride with her. Just before the dust settled, Haru cut in and made it crystal clear Jean wasn't supposed to protect Ange, she was ordered to watch her, and Jean straight up admitted it. He made it clear he wasn't some kid anymore, he wouldn't be chasing thrills all over the place, and he had zero plans to work a single thing past what he'd already been paid. Nine exploded with rage, slammed him for neglect, and swore that if her lady got hurt, he'd do nothing. Then Haru rushed in to calm her down. Jean's stance was dead on, he argued. Adventuring wasn't some charity case, it was a choice. Adventurers snatched the jobs, crushed the work they were paid for, and walked away with real compensation. Because if that whole system ever crumbled, their entire way of life would collapse too. Senna cut in, called Haru her master, and reminded him he'd crushed those monsters himself without chasing a single reward. Then Nine chimed in that even on the pilgrimage, he'd practically demanded Ange not thank him at all. Haru's cheeks burned as he insisted it was an emergency. Jean just laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Saying Haru was a total oddball towering with terrifying magic, yet somehow totally clueless about it. And even though he wore that icy front, he was way gentler than he thought. So when he stared at Haru with full focus, Jean stared at the horizon and realized the world stretched way beyond anything they'd ever dared to imagine. Haru waved it off and shrugged, saying that no matter what anyone thought, Jean tagging along as their guard would be more than enough. Nine countered that a big company would scream trouble, pull unwanted attention, and leave a bad taste, so the smaller the crew the better, and then Alice jumped in, proposing she and Santa patrol the perimeter. Nine pointed out that doing things under a proper request from the Auden household could help mend the trust. Then 9 people agreed, but Sana snapped back, refusing to leave her master's side. The second 9 promised to cook up high-class meat for dinner. Sana's face lit up in an instant, and she boldly announced she'd hit her patrol duties with full-on enthusiasm. Once that was settled, Nain snapped her eyes to Haru, face tight, and demanded a private word. She quietly wondered if Jean really got sent by the guild, and Haru cut in without a blink. Yep, he'd already been dispatched because they'd checked the guild earlier and the proof was official. The guild even laid out the logic. Anyone too close in age wouldn't judge with a clear head, so they picked someone with 0 ties to Orlando, though I'm telling you, I'm still unsettled after hearing it. Haru asked if something still haunted her, and when Jean pushed back, she confessed the truth. No matter how her mind tried to reason it out, she couldn't make herself trust Jean. There was just something off about him, and she couldn't even name exactly what. She swore the Auden family would launch their own investigation, no matter what. He begged her to keep shielding her lady. Right before Haru could even answer, Alice showed up like a spark. She'd been hunting for him. With a shy voice, she admitted she'd only come to catch one glimpse of his face before heading out for patrol, then hovered there with burning cheeks until Haru softened his tone and asked what was bothering her. Alice then asked if they could stay in Orlando until every accusation against Ange was cleared. He finally confessed that back then he'd been bragging that adventurers didn't have to lift a finger on anything they weren't getting paid for. Still, he couldn't shut off his thoughts, replaying every brutal moment of the time he'd lived under Letitia's endless mind games. Her manipulation carved into him the belief that he was helpless, someone who could never do a thing for anyone. But things were different now. He finally saw it. There were people who truly believed in him, and they were counting on him. With his gentle soul, he never wanted to shatter their hopes. Right as he was about to finish explaining himself, Alice suddenly lunged forward and crushed him in a tight, unstoppable hug. That sudden move slammed into him like a freight train, leaving his brain scrambled and his face burning, while she stared, stunned by just how painfully sincere he was. Still, she flashed a smile and said she'd known he'd blurt out something just like that. That's just how he was, no question. And that's exactly why she wanted to ride with him, because she couldn't stop herself from repaying the kindness he'd given her. With that stubborn resolve in her chest, she vowed that they'd team up and nail every last criminal who'd unleashed all that chaos. When she said that, Haru's whole heart lit up with real, unstoppable joy. The two of them locked in their promise with a pinky swear, then tore themselves away and went their separate ways. Later, Jean and Ange stormed in with her and arrived outside the church. He stared in pure awe at how magnificent the building looked, and Ange told them the whole city was packed with devoted believers and countless churches. But the one right in front of them was the Grand Temple, the place that brought them all together. In plain terms, it was the Grand Head Church, and even Jean couldn't help but look genuinely blown away by how massive and stunning it was. The second they crossed the threshold, Angel shot them a reminder. They weren't just walking in, they were about to meet a priestess. The moment she finished saying that, they burst right into the priestess she'd been talking about. Lona showed up and Ange practically burst with joy. Lona's shoulders finally dropped too, seeing her friends safe hit her like a wave of relief. But the moment Haru stood right beside her, her focus snapped to him. She demanded to know who he was, and Aang swept in, introducing Haru as a ridiculously strong adventurer, and thrust Jean into the spotlight as the one forced to oversee her. She spun back to the boys and said the woman in front of them was Lona Fallon, the priestess of Orlando's Grand Temple. The two girls had been going to that church since they were kids, and that's why their bond was so tight. Lona cut her off in a soft but firm voice, reached out and told her to get to the point, because she already knew Ange was there to report that her pilgrimage was finally done. Lange confirmed it. This was the real deal, no doubt about it. The second Lona took her hand, she instantly sent the message. It felt like Angel's power had surged past where it was before, and that only confirmed one thing: she wasn't lying. With that confirmation, Lona sealed her part of the deal, then slipped away fast, because she had other duties waiting right after. Still scratching his head, Haru pressed Ange, had her report wrapped up already, because this felt way too simple for anything he expected. She clenched her locket tight and in a low voice told him that Lona was her childhood friend. She told him that back when they were kids, they couldn't stop playing together day after day. Just like her, Lona dreamed of becoming a priestess of Orlando, and every single day she marched into the temple with that one goal burning in her heart. Ever since Ange got chosen as a saintess apprentice and Lona became an official priestess, these two have barely even managed to cross paths. She realized she couldn't change a thing, because those priceless responsibilities hit harder than anything she'd ever handle as a Sing-test apprentice. At that exact moment, Haru slid his hand gently onto her shoulder. When she swung her gaze to him, tears flooded her eyes and he admitted, yeah, it sounded crazy since they'd just met, that he genuinely wished she and Lona would one day finally talk honestly and patch up their friendship. Ange felt the kindness hit his chest and thanked him, heart overflowing from every word. Up on the first floor above, Lona stared down, watching the two of them like it was the beginning of something huge. As her eyes landed on them, smiling and laughing like they owned the whole moment, she still couldn't wrap her head around it, why it always ended with her carrying that heavy, lingering feeling. Then the monsters started hitting Orlando back to back, unleashing attack after attack with zero mercy. Haru and the others finally regrouped, but all those non-stop battles were chewing them up. Sana's patience snapped as the non-stop attacks kept crashing down on her. After days of getting thrown into the same brutal fights over and over, she finally snapped and refused to go on, and Haru instantly realized she had to be utterly drained. Alice couldn't shake the feeling that these repeated incidents had to be hiding some bigger, darker plan, and she wanted answers fast. Right then, Nine barged into the room and told them, boom, a report about the string of attacks had finally arrived. Turns out Alice's earlier hunch was dead on. Someone out there was impersonating Aang. Among the witnesses stood a merchant tied to the Autumn household, and he didn't hesitate. He swore with total confidence that the person he saw was unmistakably Ange. As soon as he heard it, Hard spun toward Alice and laid out the terrifying idea that the killer could be using the magic she'd talked about before to copy Angel's face. Alice admitted that at first she couldn't even imagine something like that being possible, until she realized that if someone was really pulling off that kind of magic, everything could get dangerously out of hand fast. Nine warned that taboo magic, if misused, could plunge the whole world into chaos, so it was locked down tighter than a vault. Most people weren't even allowed to learn it, and anyone who dared to wield it paid with brutal, unforgiving punishment. So whoever dared risk that kind of fallout just to pin it on a young girl, that screams one thing: pure, poisonous hatred for age. Right then Ange threw in her own perspective. She couldn't shake the feeling that those attacks were trying to scare her out of the race, so she'd never become the saintess. Haru demanded she explain what she meant, and she broke it down fast. There's a hard limit on how many people can become saintesses. It was crystal clear: if too many people could resurrect the dead, it would unleash a disaster so big it would break everything. She heard the shocking news: 6 pilgrims had already finished their journey and been crowned saintesses, leaving just one final spot on the roster. Haru and the others were left speechless when they realized there was only one spot left for someone to earn that title. Angel added that over 10 other saintess apprentices were out there right now, each on their own pilgrimage just like her. Because only the very next apprentice to finish the pilgrimage would snatch the last spot, Jean couldn't shake the fear that one of those rivals was plotting to knock her out of the running. Ange nodded, convinced that this was the only answer she could come up with for why anyone would go after her. Haru looked totally lost, almost like he could feel the foolishness of the question, and still asked, could someone who can tame monsters and throw around forbidden magic possibly count as a saintess apprentice at all? especially since every apprentice was supposed to get a divine oracle. Ange admitted she had a point, but then she dropped the truth. She had no idea what the answer was, and she swore something like that simply couldn't be possible. Jean erupted into laughter at the wild thought of a saintess being evil, and it was weirdly hilarious to him. But Aang nearly melted with embarrassment, then hurriedly apologized to Haru. Right then, Stana snapped again, her patience finally shredded by all the non-stop chaos around them, and Sana blurted that she'd hit her limit, saying she just wanted one simple thing: catch the criminal and force them to spill their real objective. Decision locked in, she announced she was heading back out on patrol, and snapped for Haru and Alice to come with her. They both nodded and decided that, for now, the smartest move was to keep everything simple. Right as they were about to head out, Hard spun around and looked back at Ange one last time. And he promised her, "Don't worry, everything's gonna be okay." Then he swore he'd do everything he could to find a way out. Those words hit her like lightning, and before she could even speak, the three of them burst into the room, buzzing with excitement. Jean watched her just stand there, silent as a locked door, and she demanded to know if she planned to stay like that until they came back, and she shot back that she'd head straight back to her room. Since she planned to stick around, Jean told her he didn't have to keep eyes on her right now and could finally focus on his own stuff. Before he left, he ordered her to tell him the moment she decided to go anywhere, because Nine had her own tasks to handle, so she couldn't stick around by Angel's side too. Still, she demanded that Angel call her the second she thought about leaving her room, and Angel nodded and agreed. All alone, Ange slipped through the hallways in near total silence, moving so quietly you'd miss her if you blinked. Along the way, she clocked two maids sprinting by, whispering that the guards needed food sent to them right now. Everyone else looked buried in urgent tasks, and she couldn't shake the awful feeling that she was the only one standing around with nothing to do. Consumed by worry about her father, she hurried down the hallway toward his room. Before she even stepped inside, she caught him arguing with someone, pushing to boost the guards' funding so the shattered walls could be rebuilt and medicinal herbs could start flowing again. The butler urged him to take a breath and deal with it bit by bit, but her father snapped back. He refused to slow down, claiming he couldn't risk it. He was sure he had to throw everything he had at the problem because his daughter and every last soul of Orlando were in grave danger. After hearing that, Ange spun around and bolted back to her room. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Sana teetered on the edge of total loss of control. Once again, they ripped her away from her master. Then she tore into the monsters, fighting tooth and nail while she raged like she couldn't take it anymore. A few of the guards started to feel uneasy around her, and they urged her to calm down. Meanwhile, others were grateful she was there, because her overwhelming strength made the whole battle feel way easier. Suddenly, the guard's eyes snapped to a figure below the wall. It was Ange, at least, someone who looked exactly like her, and a monster stood shoulder to shoulder right beside her. The guard snapped to action and moved to grab her, convinced she was tied to the creature at her side. But she was stuck so far below that they couldn't reach her without a fight. Sana didn't hesitate for a second. She slipped down from the wall like a shadow. With one clean, lightning-fast move, she dropped right in front of the supposed range. Determined to tear the truth out of the shadows, she swung at the imposter to break his disguise, revealing her real identity, and proving to everyone she was the real fake. The second that punch landed, smoke erupted from his body, curling upward in thick, furious waves, and the false Age snapped back, sliding her straight into her true form. Vulnerability hit her like a wave, and she instinctively yanked her hood up, hiding her face as fast as she could. Sana seized the opening and pushed her chance forward, finally ready to reveal who she really was. Three knives suddenly slammed into the dirt between them, freezing Sana mid-move. She used that quick distraction to slip out with the monster she'd brought along, then shot into the sky and vanished. Sana seethed with frustration because she'd been moments from exposing the imposter for real. Then the guards stepped in, praising her and saying she'd done well, and then they basically proved it, because right then Ange was under surveillance at home, and just hearing that, it all clicked. Sana snapped to her feet and rushed back right away to spill every single detail. The moment she popped back up, there was Ange right there in front of her like she'd stumbled in by accident, and Ange was in tears. Ange shot back that she wanted to help and admitted she'd heard monsters had shown up, and all she wanted was to jump in and help any way she could. Sana snapped with rage. She demanded to know why Ange was there and even more why she'd shown up at all. Later on, the whole crew crammed into her room, all together at once. Ange finally headed straight to the spot where the monsters were showing up, and on the way, she even spotted them slipping through town like they owned the place. Everything got messier, way messier than before. Sana couldn't wrap her head around what Ange was even going for, and what really lit the fuse was how close they'd been to finally wiping the suspicion off her name, while Ange stood up and apologized to everyone. Then she shattered again, tears spilling fast, and blurted that she only ever wanted to help them somehow, even if it all went wrong. She felt like she was the reason everyone hurt, and the thought that she couldn't lift a finger to help them nearly crushed her. She realized she'd only been in the way, so she shot back into apologies without stopping. At that exact moment, Harry surged forward and snapped, telling her she was seeing it all the wrong way. He took her hand and told her it wasn't her fault at all. They were getting crushed because of the criminal behind these incidents. Even if it hurt them both, it was never her fault, so he begged her to stop beating herself up. Most importantly, he leaned in and told her, "We're doing everything we can because you matter to us." She wiped her tears away and asked, trembling, if he really meant it. Haru promised her with full certainty that he did. The second she heard those words, her face flared bright red, and she started blushing hard, her head spinning like crazy. Haru snapped, asking if she was okay, while her father just stood there, stunned by what he was watching unfold. Haru whipped around to Sana and fired off so if she could finally show him the knives that kept getting thrown at her while she fought to capture that criminal. Still in her usual spacey haze, she finally blurted out that she'd left the knives behind at the scene. He snapped at her, shouting why she hadn't taken the knives. Those were the first clues the criminal ever left behind. Then her eyes widened and she burst into apologies because he was right. They waste 0 seconds and sprint back to the site to snatch them up. But the second Mike hit the ground, the knives vanished, gone without a trace. The imposter had already snatched everything away, and Sana felt like the bottom fell out of her. She kept blurting out that she was a failure, blaming herself again and again. Haru finally told her the truth. With the evidence gone, there was nothing left they could do. Still, ignore that for a second. There was one thing he truly needed to understand. He leaned in and demanded to know why she was busting her heart open just to help them. Baffled, she couldn't help but stare at him. Why would he suddenly throw out something like that? He told her she wasn't really wrapped up in any of this, and still, after all the arguing he'd thrown earlier, she kept patrolling like a pro, even getting more and more fed up because she couldn't land the arrest. He pressed her again, demanding to know why she was pushing herself past the breaking point. Suddenly, her face lit up like the lights went on inside her, pure joy. She looked at him like those words were praise straight from the heavens, and Haru finally exhaled, relieved that her gloomy mood had broken. Starved for his approval, she inched closer and blurted, eyes pleading, "Tell me, was I a good girl?" He softly patted her head and praised her for being such a good girl. That one little gesture lit up her heart, and she clung to his praise, then begged him to keep patting her. After a while, she finally stopped fidgeting and steered the conversation straight into something serious. She leaned in and demanded to know how dragons are born, and he shrugged like, "They've got to hatch from eggs, right?" She nodded, confirming it, and warned that dragon eggs might take years to crack open, or if the odds turn ugly, they could sit there for decades before hatching. Then she leaned in and told me the truth. When she was born, she didn't have anyone, just her, all alone in a cave. She finally burst out of the cave and scanned the world around her. She spotted other animals huddled close to their families, safe and warm in a way that made her chest ache. As she stood there utterly alone, the adventurers she spotted nearby were roaring with laughter, having the time of their lives. So she marched right up, desperate to join the fun, but every human there froze in fear as soon as they saw her. They hurled stones at her, trying to scare her off and keep her from stepping into the village. That rejection absolutely shattered her, straight down to the core. She didn't just ask for acceptance. She started bossing everyone around, demanding they bow to her and hand over food, and later she admitted she'd been a total fool back then. What she really wanted to say was, "I can't stand watching an angel look that heartbroken." Angus's father and everyone in the whole city loved her with all their hearts. She knew better than anyone how rare and precious that love was, so she couldn't forgive the criminal determined to rip it all apart. After hearing her reasons, Haru beamed with pride. He softly patted her head again and grinned, telling her she really was the good girl he knew she'd be. Right away, her cheeks flared red again, and the blush rushed back like a wildfire. But she snapped back into control in an instant, then blurted that she couldn't afford to lose herself, because if she did, Alice would definitely chew her out again. Haru said Alice was out right then and she couldn't stop wondering what on earth Alice was doing outside this late, especially since patrol duty was waiting for her tomorrow. He told her that Alice had something she desperately wanted to look into. The whole moment snapped right into Ange's room. Even after the brutal day she'd survived, her face still screamed worry. Nine said goodnight, then headed out. But Ange caught her mid-step and, with nerves in her voice, asked if she was still raging about her sneaking out earlier. Nine insisted that she wasn't really angry, at least not in the way everyone thought. But since Ange stormed out of the mansion without a single word to her, she couldn't bring herself to call herself Ange's maid anymore, not after everything he'd trusted her with. After that, 9 of them slipped out quietly. Ange lunged to call after her, but the door shut in her face. All alone, she started to spiral, asking herself if she was really worthy of ever becoming a saintess. The memory crashed back into her like a flashback from her days at the church. The moment the announcement dropped that she'd been named a saintess candidate, Lona sprinted to her side first and bombarded her with congratulations. Lona pulled Ange into a tight hug, overflowing with joy, and blurted that she'd always known Ange would become a saintess one day. Ange thanked her, then made it clear she was only an apprentice, nothing more. Lona caught that instantly, but her joy still didn't budge. She even let slip the truth. Someone recommended her asterisk to become the next priestess. Angel's eyes widened, and she blurted out how insanely remarkable it was. Luna admitted she only made it that far because Ange stood right there with her. And since her best friend was pushing herself so hard, Luna decided she'd match that fire and go all in too. From that day on, they vowed together that they'd keep pushing for Orlando no matter what. Still, Ange felt a sharp flicker of doubt in her chest. Could someone like her really become a saintess when Lona had always seemed to have that talent come naturally? But Lona leaned in and soothed her with a calm promise everything was going to be okay, because once upon a time, Lona had been so sure she'd become a real saintess. Now she sprawled in her bed, right here in the present. She kept replaying Lona's words in her head, but this time she just didn't believe a single one. Anxiety swallowed her whole, and she kept thinking her weakness had dragged so many people into trouble, until it even led her to hurt the one person who meant the world to her. Those thoughts clung to her like fire, and all she wanted was one more chance to talk to Lona, just to find out what she was supposed to do next. Meanwhile, in the dead of night, Jean slipped into a tiny hut tucked beside the castle. Inside the place, the imposter was revealed, and just like everyone feared, Jean was tied to the criminal operation. Then it came out that he was the one who'd thrown those knives earlier, giving her the opening to slip away. She spun her back to him and kept that same arrogant attitude like nothing happened. She still thanked him for saving her, and even though she was speechless for a second, Jane chuckled and waved it off, saying she didn't need any gratitude at all. Soon, his smile dropped and seriousness crushed in. He said their plan was rolling along perfectly, and if it kept going like this, it wouldn't be long before the people started losing faith in the saintess. Now the scheme was at its final boss level, and he snapped that she couldn't afford even one mistake. She just shot back that she already knew that. Then the truth hit. Ange's imposter wasn't an imposter at all, it was Lona, and her eyes burned with cold resolve as she swore she'd never forgive Ange for what she did. She laid out the plan like a trap, driving Ange out as saintess and then pushing Orlando straight toward collapse. With that goal burning in her chest, she blurted out her. She thanked Jean and his crew for backing her up in this scheme, and Jean shot back with real appreciation. As days dragged on, her patience started dropping off and she snapped at him, asking when they'd finally launch their plan because waiting was driving her mad. Then Jean told her the truth. The order had finally arrived. He said the plan would hit the streets the very next night, right in the heart of Orlando, and while the saintess still held the sky, she'd unleash as many monsters as she possibly could. And once that clicked into place, her part in the operation would finally be over for good. Still buzzing with doubt, she wondered if the plan would really pull off, especially now that some folks had started sniffing out the fake, but Jean shut those worries down, saying this twist was exactly what they needed. Then he leaned in and laid out the terrifying truth. There were multiple ways to crush an entire city. Anyone who thought Ange was a criminal would call it pure stupidity to keep trusting her, while the loyalists would brand the doubters as traitors, two sides already choking on suspicion and hate, so the moment someone even hints at a fake, the whole situation detonates into chaos. That simmering tension would finally explode, and if it did, Lona wouldn't even have to unleash a single monster on the city, because Orlando's people would start ripping each other apart all on their own. Jean was dead sure humans were born selfish, greedy to the core, caring only about number one. With that fierce certainty, he insisted everything was locked in for the next night. Then he didn't realize Alice had been right outside the cabin, soaking up every single word. Later, Alice hauled every juicy detail she overheard straight to Angel's father. He couldn't wrap his head around it. How could the priestess herself be tied to something this sinister? Alice echoed his shock, then spelled it out. Those really were the priestess's own words. Santa snapped with surprise when she found out Alice had been quietly tailing Jean. And when she pressed for the reason, Alice shrugged it off with bold, playful confidence, saying it was just a woman's intuition. She snapped that she was just kidding, but deep down it was Haru who noticed something was off first. Haru told me his suspicions sparked the moment they all marched into the church to file their report. Lona only asked him who he was, even though Jane stood right beside them, and Jane played it off like this was their first meeting at all, making Horror wonder if the two of them already knew each other and were just faking it. Then another incident crushed his confidence even more. While Ange slipped off during Jean's watch, Jean didn't even blink, didn't care, and acted like it wouldn't cost him the reward at all. That reaction only cranked Haru's suspicions higher, so they decided to watch Jean closely, because Jean looked downright jittery around Haru. Alice, catching the vibe, stepped in to tail him instead, while Nain went off to run her own investigation. The evidence didn't just contradict Jean's story, it ripped it apart, exposing him as a mercenary who made his living handling the underworld. All through his career, he'd been dragged into schemes, torture, and assassinations. Pure evil was just the surface, because the real things he did were too vile to even say out loud, and the evidence made it clear. He didn't become Ange's monitor by accident. He was chosen for a deadly purpose. He must have steered himself right into that spot, all so he could pull off his secret plan. Even so, his real goal still hung in the dark because nobody could pin down why he went after Orlando in the first place. So Sana snapped, told them to stop guessing and just grab him, then force him to spill his plan. Nine admitted that this approach was the absolute fastest way to make it work. But the truth, it was way more tangled and dangerous than it ever looked. She snapped her gaze to Ange, who stood there stone still, stunned into silence by the shocking truth that her childhood friend Lona had been scheming against her the whole time. Ange's body shook with raw disbelief because all she could do was wonder if every word Lona ever tossed her way, and every memory they shared, had been one giant, perfect lie. Right then Harris lunged forward and tenderly took her hand. He told her, before you jump to conclusions, go talk to Lona, straight to her face. Lona might have been tricked by Jean, or maybe it was some brutal misunderstanding. But either way, he snapped her out of the panic and pushed her to face her friend the right way. And honestly, Lona had always been her rock, her childhood buddy by her side. But the second those words slipped out of his mouth, Letitia's memories slammed into his head, and every ounce of the pain she caused came flooding back. Then doubt crashed in. Did he really have the right to tell someone to trust their childhood friend all the way to the end? He'd seen firsthand how often that kind of trust gets punished. Ange clocked him halting mid-sentence, and her worry spiked as she asked why he cut himself off. Harrow waved it away fast, swearing it was nothing. Alice shot him a question: what was their next move? Because they couldn't just barge in and grill Lona and Jean, not when they'd have to deal with the fiend's stubborn ignorance first. Harry shot back that he'd already cracked a solution, then broke his whole plan to the group. Meanwhile, Lona bolted back to the church and stood under the roaring night sky. Staring up at the stars, she felt memories of her very first meeting with Jean crash back like a wave. Years ago, back when she was still young, an assassin lunged to kill her. Then Jean burst in from behind, and with his 3 signature knives, he cut the attacker down before that blade ever landed. After he saved her life, he shot her a warning to stay on her guard, then basically demanded she at least thank him. Still reeling from what she'd been through, she never managed to thank him. Instead of beating around the bush, she demanded one thing first: who had the audacity to send an assassin after her, and what reason they thought would justify it. Jean later told her that Ange, back when she was just another Saintess candidate, had actually hired the assassin. The accusation hit her like a punch, leaving her completely stunned. she shot it down on the spot and swore Ainge would never sink that low, but Jean kept pushing, grilling her until she had to admit whether she really believed it, no doubts at all. He said that the harder Lona threw herself into priestess work, the farther Ange drifted away, until back when Ange was just a saintess apprentice, she still showed up in Lona's life, and then slowly she started to vanish. And ever since Loma got officially crowned priestess, the two of them haven't seen each other a single time. He pushed her to think hard about every change and every question before answering. So the real question was, had Ange been her friend all along? Doubt crawled into Lona's heart as her memories started to fade. Memories began to warp, like they couldn't be trusted anymore. She couldn't stop replaying the ugly moments with Ange in her mind. The more she lingered on them, the more her thoughts spun out of control. Her head started to spin and she crumpled to the ground. Right there in that helpless moment she caved to Jean's manipulative grip and lied to herself, telling herself her best friend had been betraying her from day one. Jean watched her collapse in front of him, a shaky grin on her face, and then he told her that he showed up because someone else had already sniffed out Ange's supposed scheme, and then he stepped in to help Lona get revenge. Once he did, every piece of the puzzle snapped into place. The very next morning, he snapped back into the present heart. Haru and the others were digging into breakfast when Angel's father strode up and grilled him about the crew for that day's patrol. Haru straightened up and said everything was handled and under control. Suddenly, a guard burst into the room, shouting urgent news like it couldn't wait. The fake Ange, who'd been playing pretend this whole time, walked right up and turned himself into the guild, and when the announcement hit, the entire place went silent with shock. Jean was right there in the room and you could tell he was utterly lost, like he had no clue what was about to hit him. Ange's father snapped, demanding to know where the culprit was locked up, and the guard answered fast. He'd already been thrown behind bars in the guild's dungeon. In town, rumors started swirling fast, but the streets still hadn't erupted into chaos. Meanwhile, right in town, Lona came striding through, like she had a mission in her bones. He pushed through the streets and caught snippets of chatter. Everyone swore the criminal who'd been impersonating Ange didn't fight back at all. He surrendered on his own. The headline shattered her. She was so confused because she hadn't done a single thing like that herself. She didn't hesitate, she bolted straight back to her hideout. Jean had already shown up and demanded answers about what was going on, and when she saw that she hadn't cracked and turned herself in, relief hit her hard. But when she asked, he just came clean, no clue who that person was or what the heck was going on. He even flickered with the thought that someone might be trying to steal the credit for his scheme, then reality hit. This mess was wrecking his plan. So he clenched his jaw, slipped into the guild's dungeon, and decided he'd take care of whoever had surrendered himself. Lona shot back right away that she'd accompany him. No debate, no hesitation. Jean told her she didn't need to go, but the second he said it, her whole demeanor snapped into something else. With a cold, menacing voice, she demanded to know why she was being cut out if he really planned to erase that person. And she made one thing crystal clear. Anyone who got in her way wouldn't get forgiveness. Especially now she was this close to sealing her revenge. Jean stared at her in pure shock. He kept it all bottled up, thinking maybe his manipulation had gone too far, but it didn't change a thing. The two of them charged toward the guild's dungeon. And finally, he collided face to face with the so-called criminal. Jean didn't waste a second. He cut straight to the point, saying he already knew she wasn't the real imposter, then demanded to hear exactly what she was trying to pull off. Before anyone could answer, Luna burst in out of nowhere, eyes wide, hands shaking, and demanded to know why this person was stepping in her way, and if they were really siding with Ange. The prisoner clammed up, refusing to say a word, and that brutal silence only fanned Lona's rage higher. She snapped into shouting right there, warning him not to mess with things he didn't need to, and swore she was the only one who'd take revenge on Ange. Right then, the prisoner burst into sudden, unstoppable laughter. Then she let the secret slip. She wasn't just someone, she was Alice in disguise, and she even pointed out that Lona's explosive outburst had basically handed her the perfect confession. Haru and the rest of the crew burst out from behind them almost immediately. Jean instantly saw it. Both of them had walked right into a trap. Haru met Jean's eyes with a chilling stare, admitted guilt for the lie, and then snapped that it evened the score, because Jean and the others had used just as sneaky tricks to pin Aang. More importantly, he made it clear he wanted Ange and Lona to talk first. because if he just arrested them on the spot and hauled them straight to the guild, that moment would have never happened. Ainge burst forward from behind Haru, closing the distance in an instant. Tears spilled into her eyes as she confronted Lona, demanding to know why she was putting her through all of this. She reminded her of the promise they'd sworn working side by side for Orlando, and then she flashed back to the moment Lona told her she really could become a true saintess. But Lona snapped, screaming at everyone to shut up. She grabbed her head like it was slipping away, her thoughts falling apart as she whispered, "It's always been this way." Haru instantly stepped in front of Ange, throwing himself into a defensive shield to protect her. Jean stayed right where he was, stone-cold indifferent to what happened to Lona. As Lona's breakdown spiraled out of control, she screamed that she hated the whole city and every single person inside it. So badly that she prayed for every last bit of it to be wiped clean. Then right in that shaky instant, her magic erupted out of control. A shadowy, slim figure suddenly appeared right behind her. It snapped both arms around her from behind, right out of nowhere, and Haru didn't even have a clue what had just happened. Luna kept sobbing while the monster ripped the room apart piece by piece from the inside out. While Har fought tooth and nail to protect Ainge from the chaos, she pleaded with Lona to stop, then time snapped and everything changed before she could even finish. The monster clamped onto her and blasted off into the sky. No hesitation, Alice snapped into action and went after them, and right then, meanwhile, Sana sprinted straight at Jean, who was still hanging nearby, ready to snag him before he could get away. He shot back a sly, faint smirk, then whipped out a knife, and right in that split second, she snapped to it. He was the very same man who'd hurled knives at her back earlier while she was chasing Lona. She yelled that he couldn't pull that stunt on her twice, but before she could finish, he shoved another weapon her way, hurling a ball at her. Alice snapped a warning to be careful, but before the words even hit, it was already too late. The ball detonated with a violent blast, sending a cloud of smoke straight into her face. The air was packed with pepper and everyone started choking hard, but Sana took the worst of it. Gasping for air, she stumbled up to Haru and, barely able to get the words out, blurted that Jean was the knife attacker. Then Haru snapped her back to her senses, insisting they had to chase him right now. He bolted out the door only to realize, oh no, everything was way worse than he'd ever imagined. Whole streets spiraled into chaos as wave after wave of monsters stormed the city and tore everything apart. Civilians were stampeding in pure panic. Then one monster lunged toward a woman and her child, moments from disaster. At the very last second, Alice lunged in, swung the blade, cut the creature down, and saved them just in time. She asked, "Are we safe?" and they thanked her with everything they had. While all this chaos unfolded, Nine grilled the knights about what really went down, and they swore that the second that huge black monster showed up, the sky instantly swallowed its light and turned pitch dark. And that wasn't even the worst of it. Every inch of Orlando had been swallowed by monsters, and in the eastern district where the Lord's mansion loomed, the knights were barely scraping by. They fought with everything they had, but you could feel it. They wouldn't last much longer. Haru snapped into action and decided they had to split up fast so the monsters wouldn't get breathing room. Alice and Sina would tear through the north and west districts. He would take the south. They both slammed on the brakes, grabbed him, and demanded to know if he really meant to unleash his magic inside the city, because they warned him it could wipe out everything around them. Haru swore he'd stick to fire magic, but Alice shut him down hard, claiming there was no way he could risk it. Then she grilled him about that sword he'd once used to save her, and the whole thing left him blushing hard. He admitted that sword was his lifeline, especially when he was banned from fire magic and had to rely on it for self-defense, so once things changed, he figured he could finally drop it, and Alice's irritation only flared even hotter. But as the talk rolled on, a wild idea started brewing in his head. He made it crystal clear. The damage had to stay contained and never spill into the surroundings, so he searched for the tiniest range with maximum punch. With that thought burning in his mind, he raised his hands and started casting a spell. Alice and Santa burst into panic, yelling that he couldn't use magic anywhere inside the city. But then horror teetered on the edge of a breakthrough, and he broke it down like a puzzle. Magic works the same way. Focus hard enough and Mana's shape bends, remaking itself into the perfect form for whatever you need. You could tweak its density, fine-tune its structure, and crank up its power, if the caster kept a sharp, rock-solid picture in their mind. Then he shoved his fire magic into one blazing point and forged a sword, nothing but pure flame. The girls just froze in terror, completely unable to wrap their heads around what they'd witnessed. They'd never even heard of a spell like that, but before they could wrap their heads around it, a monster came flying at them like a nightmare breaking free. Harad didn't waste a second. He raised the flare sword and tested the weapon with one brutal swing. He hacked the monster apart, sending it flying into a dozen pieces. He couldn't believe how natural and unstoppable it felt in his hand. With this weapon in hand, he felt unstoppable, ready to fight inside the city without wrecking everything, until Alice snapped and shouted, "Stop." She still couldn't wrap her head around it. How he pulled an insanely powerful sword out of thin air in a split second, using a brand new spell like it was nothing. Even the world's greatest wizards spent years honing brand new magic spells. Nobody just made what they needed on a whim, and the fact that he pulled it off so effortlessly made it feel unreal. Haru, meanwhile, could barely explain it because in his mind it had felt simple, almost obvious. Sana even looked shaken by what he could do, and she blurted that she might have to start calling him a demon lord instead of master, but we'll set that part aside. Haru shot them a sharp reminder. They still had a mountain of work waiting, and this was no time to waste it debating. Right then, Ainge shot forward and announced she was charging straight for the central district, the place where the Grand Temple loomed. From what the townspeople whispered, that black monster ripped through the sky in that direction, and if it was true, then Lona had to be there too. She knew she couldn't fight her way out of a battle, but stubborn determination still clung to her like armor. Because Lona was her precious childhood best friend, she couldn't stand by, she had to be the one to stop her. Harrow lunged to stop her, but Ainge whipped around and spun on, turning too, and he promised her he'd never leave her behind again. Then she called out for Nine and made it clear he was coming with her. Hearing those words, Nain's emotions hit like a wave, and he nodded his agreement on the spot. Harry didn't argue anymore once their roles were locked in. They launched into action, blazing with one goal: save the city no matter what. Meanwhile, Jean finally broke free and escaped. He couldn't believe it either because the original plan had totally crashed, but somehow the final result still landed the same. Lona finally pulled off the summoning of those brutal monsters, and that's what left him genuinely awestruck. The dungeon-born monster she dragged into the world was an archdemon, upper-class, ice-cold, unstoppable, laughing at every spell and shrugging off magic like it was nothing. The ultimate nightmare for any wizard. Because of that, Jean couldn't help but get genuinely curious about how Haru and his crew planned to tackle it. Back on the battlefield, Alice was thrown into a brutal fight against a wolf-like monster. For one terrifying second, it almost crushed her. Then the beast came in swinging, clawing her with savage slashes. But she snapped her guard up in time, blocking the strike with lightning-fast reflexes. She slipped behind it and unleashed a vicious counterattack. She hacked it down with her sword and swore that even something at that level was still well within her power. After she crushed it, she stopped dead to catch her breath. As she steadied herself, she couldn't deny it. She just couldn't fight like she did, and she finally understood why. She was only a level 22 swordsman. She had no extraordinary skills to her name, and in the end she realized she was just another average adventurer, and that terrified thought made her wonder if she was even worth anything to Haru. Then she slapped her own cheeks, shaking herself back into focus. This wasn't the time to doubt. She'd chosen to stay right beside him, protecting him with everything she had. She might not be the strongest fighter, but she knew she could still back him up in other ways, and she feared that if he was left on his own, someone would trick him all over again. And with power like that, trouble would come fast. People would swarm just to use it, so she decided right then, she had to warn him not to spill too much of his magic around strangers. Right when that thought hit, she snapped back to something Haru once told her in confidence. In every past battle, he'd only ever been Letish's sidekick, so he barely got to throw down on his own, let alone unleash his magic. There were moments when important clients demanded he show up, and they still left him standing outside waiting. Looking back, Alice realized Letisha was about to pull the same move, and suddenly she couldn't stop wondering if her actions were really meant to shield him. Maybe she'd been keeping quiet about how strong he really was, because she didn't want anyone with bad intentions to use it against him. Maybe it wasn't just cruel, it was survival. Maybe she struck because she had to keep him safe. Elsewhere, Sana had two monsters closing in on her, no mercy in their steps. She snapped her arm out, one quick lash from it, and she snatched the tongue out of the air with her bare hand like it was nothing. her face falling with a look that screamed, "That's it." Sana got bored of their pathetic resistance and decided to crush it for good. She unleashed her counterattack, and in just a blink, a ruthless swarm of monsters came crashing down and got torn apart before her. After that crushing win, she couldn't stop herself from believing her master would finally shower her with praise. She couldn't help it when he patted her head one more time. Pure excitement surged through her like lightning, fueling her drive to work even harder. Meanwhile, deep inside the Grand Temple, Lona stayed curled up tight in the Archdemon's arms. From up high, she stared down as Orlando erupted in flames. Silently, she wondered if this was the moment she finally crushed revenge on the very place that had used her. Priestesshood drained her every single day. Everyone kept dumping duty on her like it wasn't a weight, and somehow nobody ever really saw asterisk her. The one everybody adored and admired, the one they all looked up to, he'd always been firing straight at his goal. As she watched the flames dance, her mind spiraled right back to the very moment it all began. Back when she was still just a church student, she strode through the hallways like every step mattered. Her stomach twisted at how brutal the lessons had gotten lately. Panic surged as she pictured herself failing and getting kicked out of the church. She had zero clue what to do next. Then she shot a quick look outside and they spotted Angeline sprawled on the ground, peacefully dozing like nothing in the world could touch her. The sight caught her off guard, and for a moment she couldn't help admiring the nerve of someone who could just drop down and sleep in the church courtyard like it was nothing. She'd spotted Ange in the chapel before, but she didn't know her name, not yet. So she swallowed her fear, walked up to her and shook her awake, insisting that if anyone caught her asleep there, they'd come storming in, furious. The second Angel woke up, she erupted into loud apologies for dozing off, and the sudden outburst totally rattled Lona too. Once Ange finally calmed down, she blurted out, "I was trying to study, but I totally fell asleep by accident." When Lona demanded why she'd picked studying outside since the church had private rooms, Ange shot back that she knew all about them. With a bright, shining smile, she told him the sunlight felt amazing, so that's why she always chose to study outside. Then she turned and invited Lona to join her. Lona froze, caught off guard, unsure how to even answer. The moment she laid eyes on Ange, something felt off, like she was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. As they started studying together, she realized Ange wasn't just good, she was a total powerhouse, breaking down the tough stuff she'd been stuck on in class. Even so, Luna still keeps her guard up, she's shy around her. Finally, she leaned in and demanded, "What's your name?" With a radiant grin, Ange popped into the moment and introduced herself again. From that moment on, something inside Lona snapped into place. She suddenly started caring deeply for her. Ange always treated her like a real equal, never once looking down at her just because her grades were weaker. She kept cheering him on, promising that together, they'd both give it everything. But in the end, everything flipped, and Aang left her in the dust, watching her slip right into place with the other priests like she'd belonged there all her life. Lone's heart twists into doubt, like it can't decide what to believe. She started to suspect that Ange had been faking everything from the very start, like she'd been tricked all along. He swore they'd stand side by side, but it was a straight-up lie, and she'd never ever forgive him for it. She snapped back to the present, an obsession hardened in her mind like steel. She only saw one ending. She'd take revenge with her own hands and kill Ange herself. Right then, Ange burst into the Grand Temple and shouted, "Lona." The second Lona locked eyes on her, everything changed. The Archdemon surged in for the kill, and right on cue, Nine snapped into action. Plunging Ange aside, he threw his body in front of her and took the hit herself. Lona snapped with icy contempt the moment she arrived, sneering that she'd been a fool to walk straight into her own slaughter. Ange pushed forward, begging her to stop, yelling that she needed to listen, because she couldn't let this go on. But Lona, burning with rage, snapped that begging was finished. Nothing would save her anymore. The demon lunged again, and this time Nine slammed into the fight, shielding Ange while she pushed forward, clawing her way toward Lona. Angel swore, eyes blazing, that she'd never mocked her a single time or looked down on her in any way. Still, Lana screamed over them, refusing to listen to a single word, insisting she already knew her true personality. Suddenly, everything shifted. Lana snapped to a stop, frozen for just a heartbeat. Nine quickly sensed what was going on, because controlling that many monsters demanded an insane, jaw-dropping amount of mana. If Lona was about to run out, the fallout would be brutal, maybe even deadly, and we weren't about to let her pay the price. Seeing her wild, out-of-control behavior, Nine couldn't shake the feeling that Jean had hit her with a nasty suggestion spell, because there was no way she'd snapped like this purely by choice. And with that, 9 fighters flung themselves into the fire magic showdown against the archdemon. But the spell got totally nullified, and it vanished cleanly, never landing a single scratch. He stood there and taunted them again, barking that magic couldn't touch it. But 9 already knew the truth. She wasn't chasing that at all. Her real plan was something far more ruthless. She said the suggestion spell slips in through the cracks in your heart, and to shatter it, you've got to drag that warped conscience into the light and face it head-on. Her game plan was simple. Keep the pressure on, bleed Lona's mana drop by drop, and push Ainge to keep talking to her, because every second mattered. Meanwhile, exhaustion swallowed Lona right before everyone's eyes. That non-stop back-and-forth only stoked her fury to a blaze. Then the archdemon slammed into her with yet another devastating attack. Once again, 9 shields clashed in mid-range. Ainge pushed on, grabbing Lona's attention and admitting that before she ever met her, she'd always been surrounded by loneliness. So without Lona, she might have stayed trapped in that emptiness forever. Lona snapped the moment she spoke, yelling that she'd always been surrounded by other priests. But as the words left her mouth, confusion hit her like a wave, and she desperately tried to remember when it all started. Once she became a priestess, she shut herself away in her room and refused to see a soul. She swore she'd seen Age chatting with others, but the exact moment slipped right out of her memory. Spying that change in her face, 9 practically begged Ainge to keep going. Ainge leaned in and spilled their shared memories, studying together in the church courtyard, then sitting side by side in the cafeteria, shoulder to shoulder over food. 9 dug into the pancakes she'd made for them, and they spent every free day together, shopping like it was their favorite mission. She brought up the matching crosses they'd picked together, and the most important part was this. Lona was floating on air, because the moment Ainge got the revelation to become a saintess, her joy exploded to the max. As those memories slammed back, Lona's vision blurred, and tears poured down before she could even breathe. The false story clouding her mind finally snapped, and she gasped back to reality. The archdemon snapped the moment control slipped, and then she unleashed it. And in a split second, her strength snapped, she crumpled to the ground. Ainge and 9 sprinted to her side, blurting, "Are you okay?" The rage that burned in her chest finally shattered and vanished. Watching Angel's emotions spill over like a dam breaking. Lona wrapped her arms around her tightly, still dazed, unable to make sense of what just happened or why she'd reacted that way. But just as they were about to reunite, everything got smashed to pieces. An archdemon erupted right behind them. Now that the magic controlling it vanished, the creature snapped back to its own wild instincts, and it started lining up to strike. Lona and Ainge clung to each other like lifelines, both terrified of what the next moment would bring. The archdemon towered over them, poised to crush, and right when its strike came crashing down, Haru burst in. With a lightning-fast snap, he raised a magical shield and smacked the attack aside with zero effort. He asked, totally calm, if everyone was okay, if nobody got hurt. When he suddenly popped up, both of them froze in shock. Then Harrow snapped to Ainge and told him the southern district was already wiped clean of monsters. Even the other districts were sealed tight, and Alice and Santa were racing toward the temple. Now the archdemon was the last one standing. Lona was still dizzy, staring at him in total confusion as his raw power crushed her nerves. Then 9 stepped up and snapped, warning him to be careful. She told him the creature had the ultimate magic resistance, so strong that every spell, no matter what kind, would bounce right off and fail to hurt it. Haru shot her a quick look and wondered if her resistance was really any different from Senna's, because even the ancient dragons supposedly shrugged off magic, and yet his flare blast still managed to scorch her just a little. Hearing that, 9 people froze in shock. Yet she still shot back that history never shows an archdemon ever taking real damage, so there was no way she could guess how it would react. So Haru figured it out fast. Maybe that magic resistance wasn't a trick at all, just straight-up ridiculous durability. The archdemon stalked toward him step by step, sneering down with pure contempt, then jerked its signal telling him to go all out and strike with everything he had. Harrow shot a faint smile because he finally realized he'd just pushed it too far. Once it got to this point, he swallowed his doubts, accepted the challenge, and went all in. He kicked things off by hoarding his fire magic. The pressure blasting out from that forming spell hit everyone so hard they froze in place. Yes, even the archdemon. The intensity crashed down so hard it felt like the air turned to lead, and just watching it was almost unbearable. 9 finally realized this was just the full reach of his real power. Then Haru hurled a flare blast straight at the demon. The attack hit with a brutal shockwave, rattling the whole city and proving, no doubt, that it was absolutely massive. When the dust finally settled, the archdemon's towering form still stood there, unmoving and terrifying. Haru and the others couldn't tell fast if it was still alive or already gone. In the next breath, it was obvious what was left was only a lifeless shell of ashes. The moment it happened, it crumbled and burst into the air, and just like that, the archdemon got beaten for the first time. Haru spun back to the girls with a light laugh, claiming he somehow pulled it off, and then he shot Ainge a quick question. Did she manage to talk with Lona? The three of them just stood there, stunned, staring like their brains couldn't catch up with the fact that he crushed that monster with nothing but raw brute force, no tricks, no explanations. Lona especially looked terrified, and she kept quietly asking Ange, "So, who is he really?" From a nearby vantage point, Jean kept staring at that church the whole time, jaw dropped, completely stunned. They said the archdemon could shrug off 100 high-level spells without a scratch, yet Haru slammed it down with one single blow. Stunned by what he'd just seen, Jean snapped to the only conclusion he could. Haru was totally unhinged, and he bolted out of the city the very moment he could. But just as he tried to slip away, Santa. And just like that, Alice slipped in behind him and pinned him down on the spot. Haru predicted this earlier, because anyone who had Jean's personality would have been watching the whole thing from close by. Turns out he was right, every road was gone and there was nowhere left to run. Jean admitted he could have handled Alice on his own, but he knew he'd never stand a chance against a dragon in his current state. With barely any strength left, he didn't drag it out, he let go and surrendered in peace. His compliance stunned both Sana and Alice, and they both called his behavior pathetic, until Jean shut them down and said that after seeing something like that, he just couldn't bring himself to resist. In the end, he admitted he was actually pretty happy just to catch something mildly interesting. And just like that, the fake Tess incident finally burned out and shut down for good. As for Lona, the truth dropped hard. She remembered nothing the moment the manipulation hit her, and when she finally pieced together what really happened, shock slammed through her like lightning. Even though so many people got hurt, somehow nobody died, and the whole town refused to give up, rolling up their sleeves to rebuild the battered city side by side. Meanwhile, the criminal was locked away in the dungeon, and later Haru marched in to see Jean, who beamed and said he'd been waiting to meet him. Haru shot back right away. There was nothing mutual, and the truth was simple. He didn't want to see Jean at all. He grilled Jean about his real motives, especially after Jean promised to spill the full truth of the incident only to him, even though he'd gone down so quietly. Jean stayed cool and said he'd never planned to do a thing in the first place. Jane insisted that his only goal was to make sure the truth wouldn't get buried, so he reported it straight to the guild. When Haru heard that, suspicion flared in his eyes. He demanded to know if Jean was hinting that someone powerful was coming in to choke the truth itself out, and Jean confirmed it without hesitation. By now, everyone knew Jean was a mercenary, so there was no way he'd pull off something this brutal, wiping out a whole city just on his own. The truth was way simpler. He just took a job and accepted a request. The one who hired him wasn't just anybody. It was the lord of the labyrinth city himself, Azriel Millier Yerskal. Haru stood there, stunned and speechless, demanding answers. Why would the lord of another city order something like this? But Jean confessed he couldn't read the minds of the people in power, and the only thing he could say was this: what he did reveal. So yeah, those suggestions aimed at the priestess, the forbidden magic that lets you cosplay as someone else, and the spell that drags monsters into the world, all of it was Miliera's doing. Jean's only job was to trigger that magic on the priestess, and after that he was out of the story with no other part to play in what happened. He admitted it could sound like a lame excuse, but he swore on everything that he hadn't done a single thing more than nothing. So Haru blurted, "Why would you even say yes to something like that in the first place?" Jean let out a small chuckle and basically said, "Only a clueless kid who hasn't lived in the real world would ask something like that. He told me that every mercenary who lives off the underground runs by one brutal rule. They only pick jobs based on whether they'll get paid or not." With that, he declared he'd spilled everything he meant to share, then told Haru to grill Miliera directly with any questions still burning in his head. But if Jean was going to trade secrets and spill the truth, he wanted one thing answered too. Without a second thought, he demanded to know how Haru had somehow pulled off that kind of overwhelming power. Harwood admitted he didn't get it either, and the only explanation he could come up with was the one he had to settle for. Time travel with his childhood friend turned into a nightmare for him, non-stop training that pushed his body until it gave out, then switched to magic lessons that kept going until he blacked out, and even Jean couldn't shake the unease. Jean realized fast, asking in the first place was probably a mistake, because Haru seemed totally clueless about how strong he was, and somehow Jean was stunned he hadn't been thrown on a wanted list already, but Haru just promised him he'd never get involved in anything evil. But Jean shot back, calling him a fool with zero hesitation, clarifying that wasn't even the point he was trying to make, because just having that kind of abnormal power was enough to twist anyone off the right path. If Haru truly wanted to protect what mattered, he had to face himself first, because that power would swallow him whole if he didn't. The second those words slipped out, Jean realized he'd said way more honestly than he ever meant to. He realized he'd slipped out of character, snapped the conversation shut on the spot, and ordered Howard to get out. As Haru headed back, his mind raced over every word Jean had dropped, and deep in his gut, he knew she wasn't lying. Still, he couldn't wrap his head around it. Why would the lord of another city try to frame Ange, and do it while trashing Orlando in the process? And the scariest part? That same lord had access to spells most people don't even know exist, because after that incident, all it left behind was a storm of questions with no answers in sight. The second he burst out of the dungeon, he found the girls already waiting for him. The second they spotted him, they surged forward, closing in fast as panic filled the air, firing off questions. Was he okay, and did Jean try to hurt him? The doctor calmed them right down, assuring them he was perfectly fine. Then they pressed Sana, asking if she'd really been waiting there the whole time, and Sana shot back, yeah, all this time. Alice admitted they'd all been terrified of him sitting alone inside. Then she pressed again, demanding to know if Jean had heard or said anything strange. Right then Harry's mind snapped back to Jean's words. So if he wanted to save the things he couldn't afford to lose, he had to learn who he truly was. No shortcuts, no guessing. When he stared at the girls right in front of him, worry stamped across their faces, it finally hit him. Jean had meant exactly this. With a soft, reassuring smile, he promised them, once again, that everything was absolutely fine. He thought about telling them what Jean said, but then he realized it was already noon. Aang pushed them to hit Lona first, saying Nine had already packed snacks for everyone, and the whole crew nodded and set off together. While they kept moving, Haru clenched the thought in his chest. He had to learn how to control his strength, and he had to find out why his power was so wildly overwhelming. And for the very first time, he finally had people he'd die to protect with every ounce of himself. Soon enough, the whole crew burst into the Grand Temple. Ange snapped that Lona had been stuck in treatment and interrogation ever since the incident, so even Ange couldn't get a proper look at her. And then she added that they were allowed to share a meal, which was exactly why Ange dragged everyone here. Harv couldn't wait to meet Lona again, because she'd finally slipped back into her true self. But the moment they reached her room, they spotted a commotion outside. Everything was wildly noisy, like something big was going down. Suddenly, Lona's voice blared from inside, screaming that she wanted to quit. The elder priest stepped outside and tried to soothe her, begging her to think things through, but she snapped back that being a priestess was no longer something she could do. She shut herself in and demanded they promise she could step down, otherwise she wouldn't leave her room. Right then Ange pushed forward and softly called out to her through the door. She told us Nine had whipped up pancakes for them, the exact same batch Luna used to swear she loved. The second I heard it, my reaction hit like lightning. Lona yanked the door open and stepped out. Then they headed into the courtyard and the two of them slid apart from everyone else, so Sana couldn't help but wonder why they were splitting up like that. Haru, though, clocked it right away. They probably had a lot to talk about. The loner took one bite of the pancake and lit up instantly like it just hit the perfect note. Next, she loved it just as fiercely as before, and Angel heaved out a breath of relief, stunned that at least a few things hadn't changed. That taste ripped me straight back to my childhood, back when Nine would flip the exact same pancakes every time Lona came over to play, and those moments felt like pure gold. There were even days when they got so lost in play that homework completely vanished, and when the bell finally rang, the scolding came hard. That wave of nostalgia hit her like a tide, dragging her straight back to those carefree moments. After a while, Lona leaned in and told them she would. She didn't face charges for using forbidden magic. Turns out she'd been manipulated with no memory of what she'd done, and Aang was over the moon hearing it. Lona told everyone the top brass had already decided she was just a victim in the whole mess, so she could waltz right back to her old position. But Lona didn't let herself share Angel's relief. To her, it didn't matter how little she could recall, because the truth still hit hard. She was the one who struck down the old man and left the whole town reeling. After that, there was no way she could climb back into her priestess role like nothing ever happened. Ainge tried to calm her down, reminding her that it all happened because of that forced suggestion. Lona admitted he was right, and she even confessed that it was her who fell for that suggestion in the first place. When Jean once asked her if Angel was truly her friend, her confidence crashed. She froze, unable to answer right away. That one flicker of doubt cracked the door to everything that came next, and deep down, she knew Ange truly saw her as a real friend. Yet for reasons she couldn't quite pin down, she'd always felt a painful gap between them. Tears burned in her eyes as she finally admitted the brutal truth. She really was a terrible person. Even her first try to befriend Ange wasn't totally clean. She figured that studying side by side would keep her from bombing her exams. Lona finally confessed the truth. She didn't cheer on John just because she was kind. She was convinced that if she stood by him like this, she'd carve out a place in the world she could finally call home. So she twisted the truth in her head and decided that someone like her didn't deserve the title of a real friend. She'd been terrified of the moment Ainge would finally see her for what she truly was, and decide she didn't deserve to stand beside her. Angel stood there totally stunned after hearing everything. Without a second thought, she shot her hand out and snatched Lona's hand. She leaned in and told them straight up that Lona's words alone once shattered the suggestion laid over her. Even now, she couldn't help but feel real joy seeing Lona finally open up and spill her honest feelings. And Lona definitely hadn't expected that kind of reaction at all. Ainge kept pushing the point. Whoever planted that suggestion was the real villain, not her. Then Lona finally cracked, her defenses dropping as she admitted she finally understood what Ainge meant. As Ainge watched her finally start to accept it, relief hit him like a wave. So when Lona tried to break the tension by asking since when Ainge became the kind of person who comforts others, it felt like the perfect opening. And she shot back that she was just trying to be a little more like Haru. Because during that whole incident, he'd cheered her on the same way, and she figured it felt right to pass that warmth to someone else. Lona leaned in and asked if Haru was the one who pulled off that bizarre magic. Then Ainge nodded and confirmed it was him. She also told me he'd saved her on her pilgrimage to the Crest Mountains, and the way she described him, so kind, so solid you could always count on him, hit me hard. Then, in the shyest little whisper, she admitted that the moment he crossed her mind, her heart turned warm, and the second she saw him, it started racing, lighting her up with real happiness. Lona froze at that confession and almost blurted out, "Are you in love with Ainge?" But before she could even finish, Angel cut in and made it clear. She didn't want anything from him, she just respected him more than words could say. She clung to one dream: when she finally became a real saintess, she'd bring joy to others the same way he always did. Lona clutched her head in disbelief and carefully tried to tell Ainge, "That feeling you're talking about might not be respect." But then it hit her, this plain, no-nonsense reading felt exactly like Ainge. In the end, she just told her to hold onto those feelings, like they were everything. Still a little baffled, Ainge nodded and shot back a confident, "Yeah, I'm in." Soon, the whole crew packed together to meet Angel's father, and once everyone was there, Haru spilled every last thing he'd learned from Jean. He finally spilled the truth about the mastermind behind the whole incident traces right back to Miller at your school. Ever since Miliura sat on the throne of Azriel, Haru grilled Lord Cardle, asking if he'd ever met her. And Lord Cardle shook his head, saying he never had, but he definitely heard she came with a nasty reputation. Ainge also remembered the rumors. Miliere had only just taken the title of Lord of Azriel, yet everyone was already calling her a tyrant. Lord Cardle said that ever since her rise to power, trade between Azriel and Orlando suddenly stopped in its tracks. Yet he still couldn't figure out why she'd carry such venom toward them. Haru spun toward Nayan and demanded how far Azriel was from Orlando, and Nayan said the trip by carriage would take about a week. Before he could get another word out, Alice slammed the brakes on the conversation and demanded to know exactly what he was planning. Haru kept his cool and said he was going to take Azriel on himself. He couldn't rest until he ripped open the real reason behind everything that had happened. Once he'd already made up his mind, the girls didn't argue a single second. They just nodded and demanded they stock up for the journey, and right then, preparations to leave kicked off. But he slammed the brakes and demanded to know why not a single one of them looked ready to miss out, until he reminded them he was headed straight for the ringleader's location, where danger was off the charts. Alice snapped back that was exactly why he absolutely couldn't go alone. When she pressed him, demanding to know why he'd even think about an idea like that, he admitted it was his scheme to bait Jean and Lona into the jail, and because he pulled that move, tons of people got hurt in that area. So he finally confessed, again, that he was terrified of stirring up trouble for everyone. Alice stepped in fast and started tugging at his cheeks like she meant business. She told him, straight up, that this was the exact reason they were all going together this time. And then she snapped that he had to quit blaming himself for everything that went wrong. Ange leaned in and said she felt the exact same, and basically threw his own words right back in his face. So it all boils down to the same answer. The real culprit is the criminal who kicked off this whole disaster in the first place. When he heard their words, Haru felt his heart slam with emotion. Angus' father then made it crystal clear he didn't want her to go at all personally. Ange launched at him right away, refusing to sit back while others chased the truth, and said that with her pilgrimage finally complete, she could at least step in with healing magic. Because more than anything, she needed to do her part as the saintess and the Lord's daughter. Her father froze in shock, realizing his little girl had grown into someone way stronger than he ever imagined. Knowing he couldn't hold her back anymore, he stormed up to Haru and made a deal in his own hands. Then he cut it straight. She was only his comrade. Still, Haru just stood there, utterly lost. With everything finally sorted, Lona had to stay put, stuck in priestess mode and tied to her duties. While the others got ready to leave, she just prayed they'd make it safely. She confessed she'd wanted to go with them, and Ange quickly soothed her, telling her not to worry at all. Lona then snapped that she'd chosen to keep serving as a priestess for Ange, and for all of Orlando, who still forgave her even after all the horrific things she'd done. This time, she vowed to be the real deal and poured out just how much she cared, like it was coming straight from her heart. Ange felt the exact same jolt, and once that hit, the whole crew finally launched into motion. Once they were gone, Lona stood frozen in place, staring after them. With her eyes locked on the sky, she begged the Lord to shield Ange and the rest of their crew. Later, as Haru traveled on, he finally exhaled, seeing Ange and Lona and the others had truly smoothed things over. Ange said that the old suggestion must have been absolutely terrifying, because it hit Lona so hard. The thought wouldn't let go, and Miliera kept haunting her mind. Quietly, she couldn't stop wondering what kind of person Miliera really was. Before I even realize it, Haru has this faraway look in his eyes like he's stuck in a whole different world, and I can't help but ask, what's got you so bothered? Haru snapped that his gut screamed, like he'd left something crucial behind, and of course he had. The one name he'd totally wiped from his memory, Letitia. Right then, Letitia shattered the seal that had trapped her and finally broke free. Rage consumed her as she seethed at Haru for tossing her into that moldy, suffocating place and shutting her away like a prisoner. She kept cursing him in her heart and swore she'd lock him inside the very same prison, payback in full. But before she could even sink her teeth into revenge, her stomach rumbled so loud it stole the moment. Realizing hunger hit first, she pushed Haru's punishment back, because she was going to eat before she dealt with him. Even while hunger clawed at her stomach, she felt it. Something just didn't sit right. Right then, a mysterious woman suddenly stepped out of nowhere in front of her. I watched Letitia stand like a storm and swing her blade with razor-sharp precision. She snapped to the conclusion in an instant. This had to be the legendary sword princess hero everyone was talking about. Letitia, just like always, acted totally unfazed and flat-out demanded to know who the woman was. The stranger didn't just speak. She unveiled herself as Miliera Yerskal, and pure joy lit up her face the moment she finally got to meet her. Meanwhile in Orlando, right at this very moment, Jean slumped in his prison cell, kicking back like trouble couldn't touch him. Suddenly, a tiny hooded kid slipped into view right outside the bars. Jean instantly knew who it was. Stunned, the boy showed up way sooner than expected, and he pressed, so you've been watching from nearby the whole time, haven't you? The boys quietly pried open the cell door, holding their breath. In that split second, Jean finally saw the real trap in the requester he'd taken on. He was far too cunning for comfort, and accepting the job felt like the exact moment his luck ran out. No matter what, he stayed cool and told the kid to get out of there too, right now. Jean made it crystal clear. His mission stood on its own, totally separate from whether the request ever worked out. But the boy snapped out of nowhere, blasting Jean with a warning, "Don't you dare group them together." No hesitation, he surged ahead in one blazing motion, and Jean's head was gone in an instant. The guards yanked her away in a rush, dragging her to stop the disturbance. They sprinted to the cell the moment they arrived, but the damage was already done. The prisoner's assassination hit the facility like wildfire, spreading fast and leaving everyone stunned. While everyone below tore the city apart, the boy stayed silent on the rooftop. Then, with his first job done, his mind snapped straight to the next hit: assassinating Haru the traitor. Haru and the others finally rolled up near their destination, but the carriage driver snapped. He refused to go another inch. Shaking with fear, he demanded they get out, saying there was no sane person left who'd dare approach that town in this kind of danger. The group jumped down from the carriage, and right before they set off, the driver barked a warning: "Stay on your guard." As the carriage lurched away, all 5 of them whirled around and stared after it. And finally, the labyrinth city, Exiled, burst into view. Haru blinked in surprise. The city looked way more ordinary than he'd ever imagined. Seeing the confusion hit him, Ange told Harry straight up, the city wasn't a maze at all. There was a dungeon buried underneath it, and that jaw-dropping truth only made his shock go even deeper. Ange wasn't saying the dungeon sat inside the city. She meant the city was built right on top of it, layer by layer, and the deeper you went, the nastier it got. The top floors were doable for beginners, but once you dropped into the lower levels, you were stepping into real danger. Turns out the city's first lord got obsessed with that dungeon, so he built the city right over it. Anyone brave enough to clear the halls could score jewels and useful materials, and that constant stream of treasure kept swelling the city until it became rich and thriving. A bunch of adventurers and merchants swarmed the place, turning it into pure chaos and life. At least that was the dream. Alice snapped the room back to reality. Every stop on their journey had only bred darker tales about Exiled. Choking regulations tightening the city, shops and inns gouging prices nobody could afford, safety falling apart, and even the guild slipping out of sync. That's what the city looked like to them, end to end. Haru couldn't shake the feeling that this was all some greedy ruler's dirty scheme, wiping out rivals by invading Orlando. Because the more he mulled it over, the weirder and darker it all became. The guild in this city already felt lethal, and Alice refused to waste time. She pushed for the old-school move: talk to the townspeople straight out. Everyone nodded, locked in, and they started marching toward the city. Still, Haru couldn't shake this gut-deep dread clinging to him as if it had teeth. No matter how hard he tried, something terrible kept squirming in his chest.